Selectmen special meeting for the Charter Revision Commission draft report discussion. Today's Monday, June 2nd. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Eric, can you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Two more members joining.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Ready for the pledge?
Yes.
Allegiance,
Pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. So we will commence discussion on the Charter Revision Commission's draft report. The draft report and the summary is posted online. Hopefully anyone listening in has access to that. But you, Eric, do you want to sort of lead us through this, or should we ask questions?
If you'd like, I can give a quick intro.
That would be great.
And then really lead according to your question. First, Chair Chris DeWitt sends his apologies, an unavoidable conflict tonight, so he's not here. But regarding the draft charter, first want to say thank you for the opportunity on behalf of the commission for the opportunity to suggest improvements. It's been very enjoyable, surprisingly so, and we feel like we've added a lot of value. We're definitely looking forward to hearing your feedback. Overall, we had several goals when we were looking at the charter. One was around simplifying and modernizing the charter where it was possible, focusing on improving known issues. We kind of colloquially talked about it as if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We're striving to consider inputs from all town electors. And we recognize we need to start with the actual charter, which is 2006, but we wanted to leverage the 2022 revision work where possible. And finally, we were trying to be somewhat pragmatic and present a draft that is likely to be approved by the board here, but also eventually by the town electors in November. And we had a number of different changes, but we grouped them in several areas where we tried to have a greater focus on ethics. We strengthened checks and balances and good government processes. We increased our focus on ensuring the town operations are effective and efficient. We clarified the water pollution control accountabilities, improved the town's ability to hire great talents, and modernized the charter in several areas, and finally addressed some known issues with several different important boards and commissions. And within that, there's a lot of different areas where there's very specific changes. And of course, in addition to that, we actually, of course, considered a number of other changes that we decided not to move forward with. But we definitely look forward to answering questions and understanding more where you might have additional questions or comments that we might need to reconsider.
Thank you so much for the intro. Just a few words from me. And for the public, if anyone is online, which I don't really see anyone, but if anyone dials in and to watch the replay, we have 4 commissioners here. Eric Treshik, Karen Wackerman, Mary Hogue, and Jerry McHenry. We also have town attorney Phil Pierce here. Online, we have Selectwoman Christine Vitale. And Brenda Kupchik has joined. So the commission has worked very, very hard. Oh, and now we have Commissioner Brian McCann is here as well. Commission worked very hard, and I was really pleased at the way you answered my questions that I posed and the Board of Selectmen had presented to you, that you took a very practical approach to this. You looked at the last version and referenced the last version that was proposed a few years ago, and did not, sort of ignore all that work that was done, that you looked at it and thought about it, and that you didn't you didn't really propose anything that would be very controversial. You took a pragmatic approach. And I think the end result is very good. I personally feel it's a really good document. You made a lot of very, very helpful changes. And I don't see anything terribly controversial in what you proposed. So I think we should, without further ado, we can start going through what you have changed. And people can ask questions if they desire. I know Ms. Kupchik, who may not have been as involved in the process as I was. Brenda, you feel free to ask as many questions as you would like. But should we just go, do you recommend we go page by page, or is there any sort of order? Should we go through your summary?
Well,
Which is fantastic, by the way.
potentially going through the summary could help, and then we could reference back to the specific sections.
Right.
That would be helpful as we do this. So first, as we talked about in the summary, the with an ethics perspective was the first grouping, increased focus on ethics. This primarily, it reflects the Ethics Commission, which is, I don't remember what we call sections or paragraphs or Article 10, paragraph 14.
There you go.
What's B? Whatever B is.
Right.
B8. But anyways, 1014 is the relevant section for most of this section. And then there's one portion in Article 11, which we can go back to. But specifically in the Ethics Commission, so the first regarding the ability to retain independent investigators. Previously, the Ethics Commission was able to hire legal counsel independently if necessary. To that, based on conversations, recognize the opportunity to also train independent investigators. So added that to 1014B8. I'll come back to the next one, because maybe we'll close out the other ethics commissions, and please stop me if there's specific questions. But also in 1014, in section E, we added an annual reporting requirement to this board and the RTM. Obviously, not providing any confidential information within that reporting requirement. We thought it was important, though, for the town executive and the town legislature to hear the general trends of what's going on from an ethics perspective. Then we did change the Board of Selectmen approval requirement for this, for the ethics commissions, from unanimous to majority, while still, of course, retaining the majority RTM approval. That is in section 1014A1. And we did this to ensure that there would be a full board for all the years, but also we thought there were sufficient checks and balances in there requiring both a majority of this board and also a majority of the RTM. We added the ethics reporting hotline, 1014F, that ensures that the reporting from that goes to both the HR department here, but also to the Ethics Commission. And then in the old, or the current, the 2006 charter, 1014C1F, we removed the ability to appeal certain ethics commission's decisions as required by Connecticut statute. So what was in there is no longer, providing the ability to appeal is no longer allowed under the current Connecticut statutes. And Attorney Pierce could go into more detail if necessary, but that's taken out per the attorney guidance. And then the final change you made related to ethics in the next article, which is 11.6, is that we know the RTM is working on an overall code of conduct. And our Commissioner Wackerman can provide more details on that if necessary. We wanted to ensure that there was not going to be conflict assuming that passes. So essentially, we created more of a sunset clause where it allows the RTM to determine, once they pass that, assuming they do pass that, or remark that as the governing code of conduct and ethics policy for the town. So those are the full amount of ethics situation or ethics changes we're recommending. Happy to go through them in more detail or answer specific questions about any of those. And please, other commissioners, add other additional comments as needed.
So did you have access to a draft of what the RTM's proposal is going to be?
Yeah.
And to make sure that,
Was it in the package? I thought it was in the package that, materials.
We reviewed that early on,
Yeah.
and it was less around us determining whether or not the RTM proposal was appropriate or sufficient. We recognized, though, that they were working on that and have intended that to apply to the town, and we foresaw the fact that there would be some level of conflict in the way that the charter and the ordinance would be both having a code of conduct in place. So that's why we then established, with the attorney's help, the language such that if it is passed, then it could be clear on which one is precedent.
So the charter, the proposed charter language allows the RTM the option of having an ordinance supersede the standards of conduct. It doesn't mean that any ordinance that's passed supersedes the standards of conduct. And in fact, the current ordinance, if it's passed, I don't think has this language yet,
Right.
because the charter is not in effect.
Right.
So there'd have to be a future amendment to the ordinance the RTM prepared and a discussion about whether or not the ordinance should supersede the standards of conduct. But there's specific language in the proposed charter about how the RTM, in order to do this, would have to have specific language referencing this section of the charter and the intent to supersede the standards of conduct.
yeah,
And
okay.
also, there's a town code of conduct for employees, an ethics code that was just enacted, sort of. And what the RTM will do is not going to address employee things. So there will be some kind of merger of references to ethics. I'm not sure if being clear, but
Right, the RTM draft does not apply to town employees. So
Right.
it's an ordinance to regulate, appointed and elected town officials, basically.
The RTM's draft is much more detailed than what's in the charter. Right?
yes.
So would the intention be to have that supersede the charter? Okay. And Attorney Pierce, for investigators, in future, will the budget have to have a line for the Ethics Commission in case they need investigators or legal advice?
That's really an operational question, how it's handled in the budget.
But according to the charter, they will have those resources, so if needed. So, okay. And that were you saying, Mr. Treshik, that that was the case in the past and had somehow been dropped? Or
The independent investigators?
yeah.
I know previously there was the ability to have independent counsel,
Okay.
but not investigator.
Okay.
Oh, if you're referencing the appeal, there used to be in the current charter, there was an ability to appeal certain decisions. It was pointed out by one of the town electors that Connecticut Gen U statute had superseded that and removed that ability to appeal. The attorneys did confirm that, so therefore we removed that section based on the attorney advice on the elector's suggestion.
Okay. Any questions, Selectwoman Kupchak?
Yes, thank you. So I know that regarding the ethics piece of it, I know that the unanimous approval was the only board in the entire town that required that. And I mean, far be it for me to say, but it's been never looked at being changed in any of the charter revisions. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it's because they wanted to make sure that balanced, that one party wasn't, who's in power isn't putting sort of handpicked people on an ethics commission, and that both sides of the aisle on the Board of Selectmen would have to approve, especially for something as important as ethics. So I'm just wondering why this was brought up, because I've never seen it. I mean, I was around back in the 2006 days under the Flato administration. I don't remember ever seeing this, so I was just wondering why, and I'm thinking it wouldn't be a good thing.
Well, thank you for that feedback, Selectwoman Kupchak. That's helpful, and definitely that's why we're here, to gain feedback on where we may need to reconsider. The reason why we looked at this for a couple of reasons. One, as you pointed out, driving consistency where possible, and this was either the only or one of the only examples where there was a different level of approval requirement. And a corollary or another example of that, when we get to it, you'll note that on the Conservation Commission, that previously was first selectman approval or appointment only. We're recommending moving that to the full board of selectmen to drive, once again, that level of consistency. And so we thought it was important to drive a level of consistency, important to ensure that there was an ability to fill vacancies quickly where needed. And also we felt like the checks and balances from the full board and the RTM were sufficient. But once again, value the feedback, and if it's the Board of Selectmen's perspective that we should reconsider that, we absolutely will reconsider that.
I appreciate that. I'm looking at your, one of the things you have in here, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I think it's worked well for the town. I think there's compromises made. And I think it's important, especially for that commission, because we obviously want, we don't want just a two-person majority, because obviously the administration can flip and, people can run roughshod and start. I mean, I'm not going to say who, but I know in the past there were first selectmen who literally had members of their party or people they knew change their party affiliation to get on certain boards and commissions. I'm not kidding. This actually happened. So I just think that it's probably the best to leave it alone for just transparency sake for the community and people to have faith in those members that are chosen.
Once again, thank you for the feedback.
Yes, Christine.
And I just want to understand better about how the ordinance, say the RTM approves the ordinance, a couple of years from now, a different RTM could want to go in a different direction and reverse that ordinance. If that happened, would the language in the charter then be in effect?
So
it seems that right now we're assuming that we're going to have this in town code, but what if in 5 years somebody decides to take it out? Did you give any consideration to that?
So if I could answer, so right now, the ordinance that the RTM is considering, it's not been brought to the RTM yet, but that some members are working on, would not supersede the charter, because it doesn't follow, the charter provision is not currently in effect, the proposed one, so the ordinance does not invoke it. So if that ordinance is passed, there'd have to be a subsequent amendment to that ordinance to amend it to invoke the charter provision to supersede the charter on this point. If that provision or the ordinance is amended after that, then yes, the ordinance would control, unless they remove the concept that it's now superseding the charter. So it really puts the RTM in the position of being able to pass an ordinance that defines ethics. But they have to, in order to supersede the charter, they have to use specifically the language that we laid out in this proposed amendment.
Okay.
And I also,
Commissioner Wackerman.
thank you. Also, there's an existing provision in the charter that refers to any ordinance that the RTM may come up with So I think it may even be there's no conflict with what's currently in the charter. I don't know if we've looked, I think that what the ordinance will do is expand on that, rather than conflict with any of those provisions.
Yeah, so right now, what happens is if the ordinance is passed, if that ordinance is passed and this charter amendment is passed, both sets of rules would be in play and would bind elected and appointed town officials. So to the extent that the RTM rules apply a higher standard, those people would be bound by the higher standard. Because to Karen's point, the charter allows the Ethics Commission currently, even in the current charter, they're allowed to enforce violations of the standards of conduct or an ethics ordinance.
I have no problem with the higher standard. I just want to make sure that the RTM can potentially not have a lower standard than what the commission might want in terms of a code of conduct for elected officials. But it sounds like you're covered.
Okay, any other comments on this section or questions on ethics? Do you want to go to the next?
Sure.
Yeah.
Happy to do so for Selectman Gerber. And in this one, what I thought I'd do is actually stop after each change. This is, ethics is pretty much all in one article with the exception of one point.
Yes.
This one jumps around various areas of the charter, so we'll discuss if that works for you after each question.
Sure.
So first, we did allow the RTM to retain independent legal counsel and clarify that the RTM is in fact served by the town attorney. That's Article 4, Paragraph 1C, and also Article 9, Paragraph 3C. Two different sections of the charter where that comes forth. There were a number of different suggestions from several electors around having various town bodies being able to retain independent counsel. Upon our discussion, we determined that it was advisable to give that power to the RTM, and recognizing that the actual operational aspects of how that would work would be developed in, what is that again?
Rules to regulate.
Thank you, the rules to regulate in the RTM.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like there was some question, Attorney Pierce could elaborate more around whether or not the RTM was in fact served by the town attorney, so we decided to in fact clarify that that is the case.
Yeah, so I mean, that's based on the definition. I mean, I think the way it's operated is the town attorney does serve the RTM. That's the way it's always been. But it was, I can't remember, someone on the commission I think pointed out that based on how the definitions read for the defined terms in the charter, RTM members are treated separately from town officials and town officers and all those other terms. So it should be clarified that the town attorney does in fact serve the RTM.
And I understand why, I think last charter revision commission dealt with some, comments from the RTM that, people wanted this option for the RTM to be able to have its own outside counsel. And you responded to that, and I thank you for that. But there, during the discussions recently, I think there was some concern about, if you have a particularly fractious, RTM, that, every ruling by the town attorney could be challenged, and you may end up with outside counsel quite often. That could get expensive and time-consuming. And I believe that's what sort of led to the discussion about having that fleshed out in the rules to regulate. Is there any sort of further thought on that?
We're actually meeting tomorrow night. We're revising the rules to regulate now, and that committee is meeting, so we're going to talk about that then. I think there seems to be a consensus that perhaps it shouldn't be allowed to refute what the town attorney says.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be available for other things that we may need. I don't know. I can't imagine the RTM being sued or something, but we have to think through what would be the reasons. But yeah, it can't be weaponized. We have to make sure that's not going to happen.
Right. Well, my time on the RTM, working on ordinances, I always felt, I think we all always fell on you a lot, Karen, as an attorney, that to rely on RTM members who are attorneys and have day jobs, and to ask them to draft ordinances and prioritize those. This always made sense to me, especially for drafting ordinances, to not put that on RTM members. But yeah, the question of using this as a way to try to have an opposing opinion for every ruling by the town attorney, while I mean, I do think it does serve as a nice check on the town attorney, that the town attorney, not this town attorney, he would never do this, but a town attorney might feel that their number one priority is to do the bidding of a first select person, whether it's the right thing to do or not, and that having this option could serve as a check on that, as long as it's not weaponized. So I don't know if rules to regulate, you can put a check on that check to make sure it's not weaponized. But, certainly this could create there are budget implications of this as well. So maybe we'll have to budget something for the RTM. I don't know, is there anything any commissioner would like to add to that, or any yes, Christine?
I mean, I just have just concerns about, I would hate for every ruling of the town attorney to be challenged by the RTM's attorney. I would hope that wouldn't happen. And just more clarification about just the budget impact on this, but I guess that doesn't necessarily need to be included in the charter. That would be something that the RTM, and if this passes, the administration and other town bodies would need to work out. I'm still unsure about what that would look like, given the tough budget challenges that we face each year. But in listening to your meetings, I do know this is something the RTM has asked for, and there does seem to be bipartisan support for it. So I appreciate the commission's taking it up.
And also the process of choosing an attorney. I mean, I don't think RTM members should just be able to choose whatever firm, or they shouldn't be able to shop an opinion either. I don't know, this is all falling on the RTM rules to regulate.
Yeah.
So how do you ensure that, they go with a reputable firm that, and that is just not in the business of trying to, fight the current town attorney. Certainly something to consider as you develop the rules. But in general, I do think it is a good check to have the RTM be able to do this. I know I wanted this as an RTM member, and just because of the position I'm in now, I remember wanting this, and I think it would be a good check.
I still just worry about the potential budget impact and what the right amount potentially would be. And I wouldn't want other town boards potentially be put in a position that we're viewed as preventing the RTM to get the legal advice they need. I'm torn on this one. Just simply for how it's going to be operationalized. Important in concept, but
well, the town attorney has to estimate a lot of line items in his budget, and they're all, to some extent, based on what's going on in town, and so yeah, I mean, possibly won't get it right, but the first time.
I mean, obviously I have some history with this, and honestly, I think it's kind of a bit political. I think when the RTM's party is not in charge of the first selectman's office, they want to have attorneys to fight the town attorney. And then when their party's in,
I think you broke up.
Frozen, Brenda.
I'm sorry. Time when there is the situation, didn't have the majority on the RTM or Board of Finance. And, if it's a big issue, it makes things very difficult for the leader of a town. I think it could be weaponized, frankly, and I think maybe if you put some parameters in place, such as just helping the RTM write ordinances, because I know that's a lot. The town attorney is busy. And I know when my town attorney had his hands pretty full. But maybe if you narrowed it in a certain way to say if helping them with ordinances, because I do think that in the future, you could see some issues with, I don't know who said it in the room, but a rogue RTM, sort of just going after a leader they don't like because it's not their party. And then you will have those legal bills, as Bill said. And then I don't know how you handled it, really. I think it turns into a problem.
Yeah, so I think we're putting a lot on RTM committee, rules to regulate committee, to ensure that there's some guardrails around this, but I'd be willing to
Maybe we'll share that with you guys.
do a crack at that, yeah.
Because the input we're getting is very helpful, so thank you.
Any more questions or comments on the RTM legal counsel? Great, so the next section, the next change within this section around strengthening checks and balances and good government practices specifically refers to the allowable population variance between RTM districts. And this would require the variance to be less than 10% rather than 10% or less. Surprisingly, this one has generated a lot of comments and questions. This is in Article 2, Paragraph 6A2, if you want to reference it. And specifically, this came up because it was suggested by an elector. Actually, the suggestion was actually to make it like 1%, really small. We first started with asking the town attorney if, in fact, we could change this or if this is something that was governed more by Connecticut general statute instead. It did come back that, yes, we can, in fact, change it. And with that, the attorney made the suggestion that to be more in line with the intent of the statute, we should make this change to make it less than 10% as opposed to the current language of 10% or less. In practical measures, what I think it means is you're saying that it would be required to be like 9.99, whereas I guess you could, if you're depending on how you round, maybe today it could be 10.4. So it's not a large change, but it has generated some real questions. But that's the background on why we made that recommendation.
Yeah, I don't really see the practical difference between less than 10% or 10% or less. So given that is statistically highly improbable or it's going to be exactly 10%, given the number of people in this town and the number of people, 10 districts. So I have no issue with the way it's currently worded, but
I don't know if it's allowable, but I see Judy there, and she probably knows the charter better than anybody in the whole town. I think she may be able to give us some color on this, if that's okay for us just to know, because I bet you she knows.
Go ahead.
I'd like to hear what she has to say.
Go ahead, Judy. You got it?
Problems with my mute. Some handouts. We share this with the people that are here. I gave one, I found it.
Okay. So Judy, are you going to stand up there? Okay. Are you going to comment on whether we can go down something lower than 10%, or are you going to?
I've done a little research on it.
I thought so. I figured as much.
Or was the question 10% or less than 10%?
Yeah. The thing is that the only change that they proposed was to change it says 10%, not to exceed 10%. They wanted to change it to less than 10%. And I'm here to say that this is one of those things that it ain't broke, so don't fix it. Because I was on 2 redistricting committees, and the first one, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. So we made all the districts the same size so they look nice and neat all together. And then we found out when I was on the second one in 1982, using the 1980 population deviation figures, Carl Dickman helped us with that, and he said, you probably didn't know this, but there's been a very landmark Supreme Court Supreme Court decision about this called Baker versus Carr. And in Tennessee, Mr. Baker sued Mr. Carr, who was the Secretary of the State, and he said his whole point was that Tennessee had not been redistricted since 1901. And so it went to the Supreme Court at some point, went through several courts, I guess, ended up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decision was that 10% was a good figure to work with. This is population deviations between districts. And it's based on the 14th Amendment, which you probably have heard a lot about now because of birthright citizenship. It has to do with equal representation before the law, so that in each part of town or district or political subdivision or state or congressional district, every man, woman, and child had the right to be represented. And they're represented by population. And the census decides what the population will be. Then the population figures are sent to the state, and the state deals with the congressional districts and figures them out, usually with the 10%. And there have been several cases since then that indicated that some of the political subdivisions that use less than 10% were denied because it didn't represent what they thought it should be. 10% was what their decision was, the population deviation between districts. I gave Bill some copies of how the census tracts are given to each town or each district. And the census tracts are made up of census blocks, so that all the population figures, you put it together like a puzzle. And generally the registrar of voters would be helping with this project, and sometimes the town attorney to guide you. But the other thing to notice so Mr. Dickman helped us in 1982, and that became what the town used for all that time since 1982, as far as I know. I know you've been involved in this, to decide that the population deviation between districts should be 10%. And this information was passed on over the years, but didn't get into the charter until 1992. And Dick Saxel proposed that it be included in the charter, and also at that time it was proposed that instead of a first selectmen's committee to do the work and provide information for an ordinance that the RTM would agree to, that the RTM should do all the work or plan with the registrar of
I'm
voters.
having trouble zeroing in on the actual issue here, because if you have one district that's 10.001% deviation, that you're over 10% and you're not to exceed 10%. So
Well, it's supposed to be overall a relative figure that you come up with. It's called, it's mathematical.
Right, so the math, if you're 10.001%, you've exceeded 10%, so I understand that that's not legal based
That's
on.
okay.
But if you're 10.001% and your rule says you must be 10% or less, you've exceeded that as well. So what is the difference between saying 10% or less or not to exceed 10%?
Because 10%, because not to exceed 10% includes a lesser number if you want to use it. But if you
But
say.
10% or less, doesn't that include a lesser number as well?
Doesn't include the 10%, which was the result of the Baker versus Carr Supreme Court
It
decision.
was exactly 10%?
It doesn't have to be exactly, it has to be relatively, so that you have those in front of you. All the district, you see that Greenfield Hill has a population that's the same as the McKinley School area. The district in Greenfield Hill is huge, but the population spread out. They have 2-acre zoning up there. And where McKinley School and Stratfield School, those are the densest parts of the town. And on the picture I gave, well, he's got one too. Phil has one too. That so the Greenfield Hill district is huge compared to the ones around McKinley School or Stratfield School. But the population is the same. So when we did it in 72, we made all the districts the same size, but the population varied. And that was really in violation, but we were not aware of it, and nobody took us to court. And so but I talked to the registrar of voters. He said in Stratford, they do have to do 10% has to be for each district. But in our town, all they have to do is have relative relationships, so it doesn't exceed that much. Okay?
I'm still not getting, what's the difference between 10% or less and not to exceed 10%?
Because if you say not to exceed 10%, it includes less. But if you say 10% or less, I would accept.
I get it,
I would accept 10% or less.
get it.
Would not accept less than 10%.
But we don't say less than 10%, right?
Clarify, no, it does say, that is the attorney recommendation, less than 10%.
Less than
He
10%.
said it's acceptable to do that. However, I read further about that subject, and some of those towns and districts that have been presented were denied by the Supreme Court because they felt that if you get less than 10%,
You're excluding 10%. Is that the issue?
Yes,
So if it's exactly 10%,
well, in Stratford, they use exactly 10%, and it's very hard to get exactly 10% in each
Right.
of those areas. So you need to, it has to be an overall thing, that overall, in the overall plan, that it would be more or less than 10% in some districts. You can never be exact, and that's why they have trouble in Stratford redistricting, because they can't do exactly what their charter says. But we have to be a little bit, flexible with that. And that's what the registrar of voters told me, that we're more flexible. But still, we don't vary that much, because it would not be acceptable.
Can Attorney McMahon, what did it say in the charter right now? What does it say in the charter right now?
Not to exceed 10%.
That's what it says right now?
Yes.
So why are we changing it? Why aren't we just?
I'm saying we shouldn't. I'm saying it's not broke, don't fix it. And it's acceptable to use 10% or
To your
relative.
point about the lawsuit, that there could be, that, you're referencing this Tennessee lawsuit, the Supreme Court. It makes sense to leave it alone. I don't know why we're changing it. I don't know what,
Well,
is
that's
this
the
a
same thing.
problem?
It's not broke, so don't fix it, because
Are we
it
having
shall
a
not exceed
problem?
10% right now.
if you say not to exceed 10% and you want to go a little bit less than that, you can do that. But if you say less than 10%, then you're excluding the 10%. And I say the 10% should not be excluded.
Got it.
I think there's a threshold at 10%. And there's actually, in the federal courts, there's a burden shift if the deviation is 10% or greater, 10.0 or greater, there's a burden shift back to the defendant, which would be the town defending its apportionment. And I think what the town attorneys have recommended is if you make that less, if you make the rule for our town less than 10% and you don't include 10.0, then you don't theoretically have to worry about that burden shift. And that's sort of like the ideal situation where you don't have to defend yourself saying, well, if you look at other extrinsic factors like demographics or, you know, artificial barriers like ridge lines or streets or census district blocks that we don't really have control over,
Right.
town borders and things of that nature, well, we got it really close, which may succeed because there's case law where, you know, towns have been at 11 or 12% and still defended their apportionments.
Yeah, see,
But I think what the town attorneys are saying, why would you want to run that risk if you could just make a standard that falls less than 10%?
and the standard is acceptable, so we should keep the standard. And also when Carr versus Baker went to court, they also had other rules, like if there's a river, like Mill River, you wouldn't have the district cross the river. It would stop there and you figure it out on that side and figure it out on the other side. And universities and nursing homes, they count the beds, because there's usually somebody in those beds. And there's so they have a whole list of things that you have to consider, and you know, because you've done this, yeah. So it's all part of the Constitution because it's part of the amendment, 14th Amendment.
So that's the point of the change. That's the point of the change. The change is to make it more defensible under the 14th Amendment. So we all agree with that.
I'm not for the change that's proposed.
I know, but the point you're making that about the 14th Amendment, like, we agree with that. My office agrees with that. That's why we recommended the change. You know, that the case that you're citing stands for the one person, one vote principle.
Yes, that's
why
true.
there can't be big deviations. Well, excluding 10% makes the deviation less. That's all that's being excluded is the number 10%. And remember, the idea that you're going to have actually that available as a number for the deviations, given how odd math, the math would have to be is like, I mean, there's an infinitesimal chance.
To
that would
read
happen.
further in 2.6, there's another thing that has to be met, and that is that in the past, when we used to just willy-nilly draw lines, we've crossed assembly districts, so that in RTM districts, they would vote 1 year at an RTM, maybe a school or something, and then during the state election, they would have to go somewhere else or somewhere else in the school.
But that provision's not changing. That provision's not changing in the term.
No, but, so that was included in 1992, and it seems to work with the 10%. And if you look at the picture I gave you, the next page, you'll see that a very small portion of District 3 is in 2 districts. But it's less confusing for the public to not have to worry about where they have to vote every year or what part of town to go in. So that has to be met too. And whether or not these lower percents would meet that requirement, no, it has never been explored. So we should keep it just the way it is and not change it. So we used to have another, I mean, this is the, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But when I was on the charter revision, we had another saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm saying don't throw the 10% away.
I'm sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
I think what the town attorney is suggesting to the commission, and we've suggested to the Board of Selectmen for consideration, is that it is broke. And that the broken part is that the language that's presently in the charter is language that creates a possible burden for the town to defend against. If you step back and accept the new language, no one is throwing out all of the constitutional provisions and protections of one man, one vote. No one is suggesting that we are gerrymandering or excluding people by river or by nursing home or by anything.
Right.
What we're doing is, we're giving the town an opportunity to have a benchmark guideline. And when you go to redistrict, that benchmark guideline is defined and defensible.
Okay.
So it is, at the suggestion of the town attorney, broke. We are suggesting a fix.
He didn't say it's broken, he said it's possible to do it.
Well, I'm just
legal.
trying to use your language, Judy. You know, so you
My
say.
language would be to include the 10%.
I understand, but I'm not looking to argue with you, but what I'm saying is, you're suggesting if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the town attorney is suggesting to us that the fundamental language puts the town in a defensive position. If you change it, it is easier to comply with the law, protect one man, one vote, and move forward. We're all still held to the guidelines and standards of proper representation.
Well, now it's under the jurisdiction of the RTM, so if they want to use the 10% and it's acceptable worldwide, they can use it. But the thing is,
Charter? We couldn't violate the charter. If this changes, we couldn't do that, violate the charter, do 10%, right?
you could, because it was a Supreme Court decision.
No, what
Can I-
do you do with the charter
You
said?
could violate.
I feel like I'm lost here. This seems like spending a lot of time on something that is so remote. I don't really understand the debate here. For the public's, like, let's say we have 60,000 people in this town, which we have more, and there are 10 districts, so we should have 6,000 per district, and a 10% deviation would be 6,600 in one district. And we're debating whether if you have 6,600 or 6,601 or 6,600, like, is that what we're actually
That's what we're
spending all this
debating.
time?
And not only is it that ridiculous, I think it's even more ridiculous because you're using census data that's 2 years old. And your chances are, by the time that you enact the reapportionment committee to fix the problem, you're probably off by another 2 or 3%. So the one is just.
We're also suggesting it should be 6,600 is high. It should be less than the 600 difference. The lower that 600 difference goes, the more one man, one vote compliant we are. So this seems like a really wacky way to spend time, in my opinion. That 600 versus 599, and the way we're describing it now is we can go as low as 0. If we have 0 different, if everyone is exactly 6,000, that's the best scenario. That's what we'd be shooting for, right?
But it's not required.
It's not required, but if it's 6,601, then that can't happen because that's over a 10% deviation, right? But we're spending like hours on whether it's 6,601 versus 6,600 versus, 5,000.
Spread it out among the other districts, so it's not just going to be
Right.
one district that's different than the others. They're all relative.
You'd be having you'd have a smaller difference, so it's.
Smaller difference than 6,600. We're saying it would be 5,999 versus 6. I'm not really sure what the real issue is
The
here.
issue is, the second part of it, how do we know with these other figures, if we can do away with, if we can honor the other part of it, which says we would like to reduce the number of split assembly districts in local districts, and that has not been tested. So I'm saying, why take a chance? Maybe you might find out after all that work that it doesn't work out.
For just 0.00001%, it's unlikely, I think, that it would make that much of a difference. I think it would be infinitesimal.
It's not only unlikely, it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
Because the day after that you make that apportionment, 3 people are going to move into that district. It's absolutely impossible.
And
There's
our babies
just,
will be born.
yeah, and a subdivision approved, it's absolutely impossible.
And then-
But what you're trying to do is just set like a maximum So that as you approach that, first of all, if you hit 10 and you start looking into the problem, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is set a threshold so that when you get to 6.5 or 7 or 8, that you start forming the committee and you start thinking about the reapportionment.
And we have done that. That's the way we operate, right? We don't get over 10.
But if you say cannot exceed 10%, you can still use the other percents lower than that if you want.
Right.
This way, what it says, what you're proposing, and you're excluding the 10%, which has been working for.
But I don't think there's ever been a district that was drawn that was exactly 10%.
Not in this town, that is not required.
No, I'm saying, you're saying we're losing the 10%, but I don't think there's ever been a redistricting map that was drawn where there was exactly a 10% deviation. So I don't think this is gonna, I think the change doesn't affect any of our past practice in the town. I think Commissioner McCann summed it up well, it just makes the standard that we have to apply more legally defensible.
I'm talking about the future, actually. If we should use other percents, it has never been tested. I don't know if it would comply with the assembly district requirement here. It may or may not.
But historically, we've done redistricting in this town with that assembly requirement, and we've never had to hit 10% to affect that change. So I think we have seen that.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead
Right,
horse.
but to Judy's point, Phil, I mean, has the town ever been, first of all, has the town ever been challenged on this? Like you had said, you wanted to change it because you wanted to avoid challenges, and I mean, I actually think this is a great discussion. I mean, there was a hell of a lot of discussion last charter revision about a whole bunch of things. I mean, I was interested too, I don't really understand it, and I think, you know, going back to the, if it's not broke, don't fix it, and if the town's never been sued, and
Never been sued.
we had it this way, and we've done redistricting, and there's never been any issue, I'm not really sure why we would change it. I don't see the burning reason to change it.
I think it
And I
should
think
say,
Judy's bringing up some good points, and I think maybe people are getting frustrated because, you know, it's information that I think is helpful to us as a board to understand.
It makes it more consistent with the constitutional standard. So if the board could decide it doesn't want to do that and just rely on the past, or it could make the change. It's up to the board.
Okay, I think,
And it says up to, right? No more than 10%, no more than 10%.
not to exceed
So you
10%.
can go up to 10%, or you can be lower than
Below
10%,
that, yeah.
the way it's currently written in the charter now. I mean, Phil, do you have any data that the town has had a legal challenge on this in the last 50, 60
The town of
years?
Fairfield, does not have a legal challenge on it.
Well, okay. I mean, I didn't understand, that's why I asked Judy, because I wasn't sure where this came from. And I know she's been involved in charters for a long time, and I don't remember, like, why, I didn't
When you
understand
do,
why this was.
It won't be based on population, it'll be based on demographics. Because that's what towns get challenged with, it's not on population. I mean, you'd have to severely exceed that to cause a red flag with population. It'll be on demographics like race, that's where you'll get challenged.
But not on the percentage?
No.
Like if you were to go a little bit up?
Because
It wouldn't be
percentage
challenged, you don't think, on
of folks, if it's distributed correctly, is not prejudice. Assuming you have the same amount of white people in each district, it's not prejudice to have a greater population, but you'll get challenged on demographics, and I've seen those in other towns. We don't speak to that, so.
So, did the commission, did you guys look at other towns, like what are what's the majority of like other towns have it, say in their charters?
No, we did not, because this was actually tightening the standard and it seemed to be such a minor change, we did not do further research on it. I would also say, this is not the hill we're gonna die on here, so.
I would say like,
Really,
I don't know why, yeah, it seems like such an.
Well, I don't think we're dying, I just wanted to understand it is all.
but
Spend a
we'll
lot of
absolutely
time
take
on it.
direction though, if this is something that causes more controversy than we expected, because obviously we didn't expect this to be at all controversial.
I keep feeling like I'm missing something, the difference between,
Well, you weren't around last time, this isn't controversial at all. This is really nuts.
the difference between 6,600 and 6,599 people. That's what we're talking about, and I don't really understand why it matters, but I've known Judy a long time, and Judy thinks it matters. So that's why we gave her the benefit of the doubt and had her speak. But I still don't see. Yeah, it's definitely not worth it, in my opinion, continuing this conversation. We can just vote on this eventually and move on, because no one wants to die on this hill.
My point is
On the one person.
It's really up to the RTM now because they have to plan, and if they use 10%, it probably wouldn't be challenged because it was part of us.
Right, if they use 10%, or if they use 9.99999%, they won't be challenged either, which is, this allows you to do either, to use.
0.999% is more constitutionally compliant with 10%. That's the difference. That's what comes out of those Supreme Court cases, because it's closer to one person, one vote. Those cases are all about giving one person, one vote. So that's not going to be an issue. But if the board doesn't want to change it,
No one's going to get too exercised. Okay.
The next topic is, per your request.
Christine wants to ask something.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Well, I
Bill,
just,
Christine wanted to.
You like 5999 better, or 6, 5, or 6?
I mean, I respect Ms. Ewing's comments, but I also respect the town attorney, that if the proposed change is making us comply with the Constitution, the Constitution, I should think that we should move this forward. It seems, as you said, minuscule in terms of the amount of people we're talking about, and if it lowers the risk and provides protection to voters as well as to the town for future litigation, I'm comfortable moving forward
All right.
as presented.
Cool.
And I would just ask that, I don't know if what Ms. Ewing shared with you, Mr. Gerber, if it's posted on the commission's page. If it isn't, being that it was referenced and shared with you, just to post it potentially with the backup with this meeting, just so the public, if they are listening and they want to, understand Ms. Ewing's comments better, they would have access to that.
Yeah, we can post this, but I think it's just the districts. Are there census data on this, Judy? Or
Here,
I can't read it, it's too small.
census tracks,
It's
have
the,
census blocks in
it's
it.
the blocks, okay.
Yeah. And the information comes on a sheet of paper, as far as I remember.
Okay.
The number
Okay.
corresponding population to the census blocks.
This is on the town website.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just, I don't have it in front of me, so I
Okay.
want to make sure that we're just not missing it. Okay.
All right.
So the next topic, we defined the compensation change process for Board of Selectmen members. This was specifically requested by the Board of Selectmen for us to do this because it's not currently outlined in the charter. So we wrote the current process that is followed, and that is now in Article 6, Paragraph 1H.
You won't get a raise that exceeds 10%.
And that's clearly outlined there, the process as it's followed today.
Any comments or questions?
No, thank you for clarifying that.
The next section also refers to this board, and we've added a requirement that any person appointed to the Board of Selectmen due to vacancy during the first 18 months of the term must then stand for election at the next municipal election for the remainder of a full term. That is in 6.3B. And this specifically strengthens the elector input. And if there were a situation where a select person were elected and then, let's say, immediately stepped aside, and then someone were appointed in that person's place. And then under the current charter, that newly appointed select person could then serve for the next almost 4 years. We thought that an appointed select person during the first 18 months of a term, if they were appointed, should face the voters in the next municipal election.
What does it say? What is it now?
Just stay.
Just stay the full
Just stay
term.
What's the current language?
They just stay.
They complete the term.
Was the language
I thought it
that,
had to be appointed by the first selectman within a certain amount of time or something like that,
Yeah, once they're.
wasn't it?
Yeah, and once they're appointed, then they stay the rest of the 4-year term.
The appointed, correct, okay.
Right.
So 18, so this language says 18 months. If they resign before 18 months, they have to run on election, a special election.
No, just with
No,
the
the next.
next municipal election. So there'd be a municipal election
How
anyway.
does that work? Yeah, how does that work? Like, so for example, if it was the opposing party, right? Then would it just be sort of like a primary because it can't be 3 members of one party? How does that work?
Yeah, I would think so, that the appointee would either run for the party they're in, or the party would decide to put someone else up. It'll just be a regular election with 2
They
candidates.
would have to,
You know,
so say there were 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans that wanted the empty seat.
Uh-huh.
Would they run would it be a primary? Like
No,
a
so
special
it's-
primary election?
Brenda, so this is essentially it's not essentially, it is the process that is used to fill Board of Finance vacancies. So, we had a vacancy on the Board of Finance during this term, that person only served until the Board of Selectmen appointed the replacement, he only serves for the 2 years until the next municipal election. So it's the same concept. I mean, you're right, I mean, if somebody's ineligible to serve, they would not be able to be on the ballot, so you may just have one person on the ballot, on the general election, but there'd have to be a general election to elect who the person is. It may just be an unopposed race if it's the minority seat.
Does it work like, because in the past, right, haven't Phil, with the Board of Finance, we wait, right? We say the person leaves, right? We don't have a special election for the Board of Finance. We wait till the next election, whether it be the full.
Right, so that's what this language is doing. It's the same concept. If the Board of Selectmen fills the vacancy and appoints somebody, then that person would serve, if it's in the first 18 months of the term, they serve until the next municipal election.
Okay, I understand. So you're saying they could still do the appointment, but then it opens up to an election in the next municipal election.
It only would take effect if somebody's eligible to get reelected in the midterm. Because otherwise, they're up anyway in the 4-year election cycle, right? So.
The last proposed charter dealt with this as well, right? Wasn't there a proposal in
I
that?
don't remember.
I think so, but I
I
couldn't
don't
quote
remember.
where.
I think that was, that was something that came up because of, in the past, we had someone who served for a very short period of time, resigned, and there was, a court case that came out of that, but that there should be, someone shouldn't be able to resign from a selectman seat, then have someone appointed, after a few months and serve out the next, 3 years, and, yeah. So this.
Well, the town actually, lost that case, right?
No, the state statute last time.
Yeah,
The state statute, we tried to have a contest in the middle of it, which the state statute allows.
right.
The problem was that the Board of Selectmen had already voted for somebody.
Yeah, I think the courts ultimately went and said that your charter has a certain process and you didn't follow it. And now this creates a new process that there would have to be an election.
Well, this doesn't change that. All this does is change the length of the term if the Board of Selectmen makes an appointment. They
Okay.
stand for the next municipal
I
election.
think this was actually something that was put in the proposed charter last time, because it was a big
Might have
topic.
been.
But electors can still petition to have a special election?
So that language is retained, but the outcome of that Supreme Court case was that the petition process only applies if the Board of Selectmen does not fill the vacancy within 30 days.
Right, and the last time it did.
And the Board of Selectmen did fill it and then
And they
tried.
did.
In the case, what happened is, right, it was filled, and then there was the petition after the fact. So
Right.
it doesn't, in that situation, it wouldn't change anything about the validity of that special election still is inconsistent with the charter.
Right.
Got it.
All it changes is the length of the term.
Got it.
But this makes this would be on the ballot in the next municipal election automatically. Which to me seems more democratic. I mean, people should elect who's in office, right? So.
Support this change. This is how I first got elected to the Board of Education for this similar situation.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this?
So the next area in this section, we strengthened the independence of the internal auditor and clarified specific reporting structure. That's in Article 9, paragraph 16. And specifically, we called out that the internal auditor, or auditors, technically there can be more than one, but the internal auditor may only be removed for cause by this board. Also, that today it says the internal auditor reports to the fiscal officer. We clarified that on matters of administration, but we've added the point they would report to the Board of Finance on audit matters. And if there were any audit matters that involve the fiscal officer, that should be reported also to the Director of Human Resources and the Board of Finance. So made it clear, only remove for cause, and clarified how the reporting works to ensure that there are stronger, audit measures in place.
Yeah. Any comments or questions on this? This is, in my opinion, a
I'm
very.
not sure it should be in the charter, but should the Board of Selectmen get copies of those audits? I don't know if it should be in the charter, but I'm just asking, just as a question.
Of
Because
internal
the Board of
audits?
Selectmen doesn't get any of that, but.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
it does say
The Board of Finance gets.
the current charter, so the charter and today, and we retain this language, does require the internal auditor to make reports to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance semi-annually, and at any other times requested by either board. So we felt that we agree with you that the auditor should report on occasion to this board, and that is in the charter today, and that is retained in the charter.
But the reports are public.
We haven't gotten one.
Well, the reports are public, but
We never got, we haven't done.
The audit specific things, I'm not sure if you get views to audit specifics, that may be a different question.
Well, the audits are public documents. The audit committee meets regularly, and the audit reports are in the backup for those meetings. But in terms of the internal auditor making a report to the Board of Selectmen, I'm not sure I recall that happening, like a review, a year in review type thing, or, yeah.
We didn't look to whether it is happening, but it is currently in the charter. So for reference, that would be the very last paragraph or bullet of that, number 5, B5 in that section. So I guess 1916 B5 refers to that area. So the next point refers, and I referenced this earlier, the appointment of the conservation commissioners. Today, the first selectman is the only, has sole appointing authority for conservation commissioners. This is in Article 10, Section 2, and we are recommending changing that to be consistent with all other commissions that are appointed by the Board of Selectmen, such that it's a full board appointment as opposed to only the first selectman.
I would love to know the history behind why there was the sole. It's so strange that
The state statute, I think, defaults to that, but the town doesn't have to follow it.
No, this makes perfect sense to me. I don't know why conservation would be an exception that every other,
Exactly our thinking as we looked at that.
Okay.
And then finally, we did add first selectman approval on appointments from other boards and commissions like the animal control officer. So using that as an example, and this is Article 9, Section 25. The animal control officer is appointed by the police commission. That's not changing. But we've added with the approval of the first select person to ensure there is at least some selectmen input into all of the appointments of the various town officers. And that's the conclusion of the section on strengthening checks and balances and good government practices.
Thank you. Okay.
So the next section, we've titled Increasing the Focus on Ensuring Town Operations Are Effective and Efficient. As you recall, because several of you participated in this meeting, we did seriously consider and do recommend adding a chief operating officer role. That is in Article 9, paragraph 14. And we believe this role has played an important role in both the previous and the current administration, and we believe it can continue to play that in the future. Thus, we'd like to bring it into the charter with a focus on helping the town run more effectively and more efficiently. And then as part of this, we did consider and recommend that the chief operating officer be an ex officio member without vote on all boards, commissions, and committees.
Christine.
Thank you. I support adding this position to the charter. And as I shared with the first selectman and with the board of selectmen when we approved the first selectman's recommendation, I have concerns about this position being ex officio to all boards and commissions. I'm not really seeing the need for every board and commission. I can, especially since not every town department reports to the chief operating officer. The board of selectmen is ex officio to boards and commissions. So if the first selectman was not able to attend, he could ask a selectman to attend in his place. Other staff is already assigned to boards and commissions. DPW, Director of DPW works with TPZ and Parks and Rec. The chief operating officer, I noted, was ex officio specifically the RTM. There was language in the charter on that was added. The Director of Health works with the Board of Health, Director of Parks and Rec, the Parks and Rec Commission, Director of Human Services, the Health and Human Services Commission. The Director of Community Economic Development works with the Economic Development Commission and Affordable Housing. The WPCA, based on recommendations of your commission, will have a town engineer as a voting member. So I do think, and in addition to that, I see that in section, you're adding a liaison. Each board and commission shall have a liaison who shall be a town employee designated by the first select person to facilitate communication between such board or commission and the first select person's office. So that's another layer of just communication and oversight by the first selectman's office that I'm not sure having an employee, especially right now, one that could be changing with each administration, having the latitude to participate in any town meeting, make motions, steer the discussion. It just, given this is somewhat of a new position for town, I'm a little bit just concerned about how that potentially might play out. And this is in no reflection to the current administration, the current COO, the past chief administrative officer of the town. I very much somewhat look at worst case scenarios and how this, by giving this authority, could be abused by somebody in the future, looking down the road. And given that there's other ways for the first selectman to participate in boards and commissions, I'm just not seeing the need right now to have it be in the charter. And especially since in terms of the Board of Finance and the RTM, very often the COO will be at that meeting presenting, so would be accessible to other town boards to be participating in the discussion for matters that have already been through the Board of Selectmen. It would not be, that COO would not be necessarily speaking for the Board of Selectmen, they'd be speaking for the administration. So I could see it just being some gray area in some instances. So would be interested to hear your thoughts on why you think it is necessary. I would also be curious just in terms of, this is more for Phil, for the town attorney, whether or not the first selectman could delegate his ex officio power if need be, if there was a meeting that he just couldn't attend and he wanted the COO to attend in his place, could he let the chair of a board of commission know that the COO would be attending in lieu of the first selectman? I know that was a lot, but
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily. If I were, I'm not sure it's fair to put it on the commissioners as to why they think this is necessary. I think they did it because I asked them to consider it, is one of my questions, and the reason that I thought it would be helpful. And I don't, Ms. Kupchik can weigh in on the former chief administrative officer. If for example, if I'm going to a Board of Finance meeting and there's you can think of a million examples, but there's a solid waste and recycling commission meeting and they're going to talk about, rates or something like that. Like, I think I can't go to both meetings. I would want to be represented in both meetings somehow, and to have a chief administrative officer or a chief operating officer go and sit in the audience like everyone else is not as helpful as someone who would sit at the table and be able to discuss, someone who I work closely with, be able to discuss the point of view of the administration, all the work that had been done by the administration, calculating what the rate should be, let's say, and be able to present that and not be shut out. There is a potential, if you think that there's potential for abuse, I don't really see that. But sometimes I could see that a board has a view and they just don't want the CEO at the table or to be able to make a statement on behalf of the administration. And from my standpoint, it would be very helpful to know that I could attend another meeting, because there are so many meetings and so many important issues going on, and be able to have someone that I've worked closely with, worked through the numbers with, worked through the issues with, go and represent the administration at the table, and know that that person can't be excluded because, let's say, the commissioner of that the chair of that commission may not, want the person there at the table, which does happen from time to time. But if the person is representing the administration, would have the full weight of the administration's views and be able to present those while the first select person is at another meeting. There's meetings that you can go to almost every night. Depends on how important they are. Sometimes it's hard to pick and choose. And dividing up the responsibilities makes it more practical in this day and age with the complexities of running a complex town. It's not really the most important issue on the table here, but I think from a practical standpoint of trying to run the town, it's helpful for anyone who's first select person to have someone that can do that for them. And I don't really think there's a lot of abuse potential for this, because that person is representing the administration, and the administration, the first select person is accountable to the people, and if people don't like the person that's representing them, and they don't like the person who appointed that person, they can vote them out, so there is accountability from that standpoint.
Well,
We
that's-
did, as a
Can
commission,
I ask the commission, because I asked a member, I asked a member the other day of the commission, they said this was taken out. Is that true?
no, it is still, it is here, just pulling up the exact language. No, in section B, specifically to answer your question, Selectwoman Kupchak, the 914B, the last sentence, the chief operating officer shall be an ex officio member without vote on all boards, commissions, and committees. So it is in the recommended draft today. And this is something we discussed quite a bit as a committee, raising some of the same points that Selectwoman Vitale raised also. And we recognize there are pros and cons overall as a commission. We felt like the pros were outweighing the cons, so we did move it forward. Just one clarifying point for one point that Selectwoman Vitale mentioned. The liaison we're recommending, we'll talk about that separately, but that is not anything to do with sitting on a board or being an ex officio member, anything like that. That is a completely separate point. So I think we should keep that one separate from this. But your other points are very fair, that this may be an issue we want to debate at further length.
And to the first selectmen's, thank you for that feedback. I would be open, have you considered if there were specific boards where you think that, maybe not every board, but if there are certain boards that you don't feel or that don't already have a department head actively involved, and you think that the COO should be ex officio of that particular board, similar to WPCA or the CFO with Board of Finance, I would be curious to know if you could get that much detail as opposed to an overall blanket of everything. Because I very much don't want to, I hear what you're saying.
Well, it's hard to know, where the issues are going to lie at any given moment, and which commission will have, things to be discussed and debated, and it can change on a dime, right? I do think, as the first selectman is ex officio on all boards and commissions, and so to be able to designate somebody to go in their place because of the demands of the job, and not being able to clone oneself, I think it's helpful. There are clearly some boards that you could think offhand might be more active and might want to have that, but there are others that have become, have had issues that have become more interesting that I wouldn't have expected them to. So I wouldn't want to necessarily limit that ability. I think it would be useful for the first select person to be able to have a right-hand person that they can divide up the responsibilities of attending meetings with, and trying to execute, the priorities and policies of the administration. Nothing more than that, but,
And not implying that there was anything more than that. I think that, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, which our board, as the executive branch, and part of our roles and responsibilities to assist you in putting forward policies and strategic planning for the town and to superintend the business of the town. I would be open to, if you feel that you need assistance in terms of covering meetings, that you would consider turning to Ms. Kupchik and myself. And this is just for future boards of selectmen as well, being that we are already, unless this changes in this charter, also ex officio to boards and commissions and can represent the administration, or in instances where the Board of Selectmen has already voted, then it's really representing the actions of the Board of Selectmen. So just something to consider. I am very much, we have a lot of boards and commissions. I very much appreciate the autonomy, I think, of allowing them to also do the work. The Board of Selectmen appoints very talented residents. So I want to make sure that we aren't inadvertently creating a situation in the future where we're creating a situation that might in any way hamper that autonomy.
And just to be sure, I think everyone knows this, it's ex officio without vote. So you're sitting at the table for the sake of discussion, but you would not have a vote on any matter.
But you could still make motions.
Right.
So
For discussion.
you could still, yeah. So that, that it changes the dynamic, I think, potentially. I'm not, and again, not saying at all that past or present would do that. Again, looking just for how things could potentially go awry, and want to make sure that we're looking at it from all different angles, and see if there's another way of reaching the same outcome.
Okay.
Can I ask, Attorney Pierce?
Appreciate any, you.
No, I actually appreciate you raising it, and you make a lot of good points. Attorney Pierce, does the first selectman have the authority to appoint an ex officio member on their own within the guidelines of the charter?
No. Under the current charter, no. No.
No? Okay. So, I mean, my opinion is, after listening to Christine, is that, and I know this from experience as well, you have department heads who attend these meetings for the most part. And I know I did anyway, the first select person works directly with their department heads, meets with them all the time, is in constant contact. They understand what's going on. They understand what the administration's, goals are and what they want. So, I could just, point out, I mean, the majority of our boards and commissions have department heads attending them. And then they also, take Tim Bishop, for example. He runs the Conservation Commission. He's great. He knows what he's doing. I never felt like I needed to send anybody over there because I know my department head was doing a good job. Knew a lot more about conservation than I did. So I just personally think that it is a slippery slope. I don't think that we should be giving, the power of the office, to someone else. I definitely don't think they should be included in executive sessions. I think that's, just for elected officials and attorneys, but I can't see one, like, Sans Clary's the health department. Every board and commission has a department head. And, I feel like this may be trying to write something into a charter to fit the need of one administration that may not be the issue with other administrations. I agree with Selectwoman Vitale. I think it's that, you bring up the point that the Board of Selectmen are ex officio members. They can attend meetings. I'm not in favor of it. I don't think it's never been needed. I didn't think I needed it. During the day, yes, CAO or COO goes to meetings with department heads, couldn't even call a chairperson of a commission and share the administration's viewpoints on specific things. for example, Christine, you're on the WPCA commission by charter. So, there are sort of checks and balances already. I don't really see the need for this. I think this is more specific to one administration as opposed to a founding document that's going to govern many administrations going forward. And, I think it could be in the future not be used appropriately. And I think it may be offensive to commissioners, someone who isn't elected, showing up sort of throwing their weight around. They may not say things exactly the way the first select person wants to have them said, or I don't know. I just think it's not a great idea.
Okay, should we move on to the next?
We appreciate the great feedback. We'll look forward to getting your direction, I think, at the end of the month.
Would it be controversial if we said the first selectman or his delegate can act as, in other words, if we gave you that authority to delegate somebody, would that be as controversial?
I mean, it's a very good question, whether that would be to delegate for a specific meeting.
Well, we know that you can be ex officio.
Right, and so if I can't go to a meeting, can I delegate somebody?
Not under the existing charter, but
No, but the question is, Phil, that how about instead of having someone have blanket ex officio powers, could I, as the first select person, there's a meeting I can't attend, delegate someone as in my place to be ex officio at a meeting?
If the charter said so.
Yeah, I think if the charter said so, I mean, there is language in the proposed revision on delegation, that might cover that. But the current charter doesn't allow for.
Right. So Christine, yeah, go ahead. If that
Well,
would
and
be.
that's why I asked, because I understand and can absolutely see instances where you want to participate, but, and I mean, I think it's tough because there's nothing from stopping you to say I delegate my ex officio power for every board and commission. You pretty much can get around it the same way, but I would feel more comfortable, if there's just certain instances or certain meetings that you felt or certain issues were coming up that you were more specific, and when you wanted to delegate that power, I would feel more comfortable with that. And to, as I mentioned, and Ms. Kupchik also alluded to, many of our boards and commissions already have a department head that work closely with them, and I would think that they would be the logical conduit for information from the administration to that board and commission. But that's just me. I don't want to necessarily,
Not all department heads.
Attorney Pierce, could the selectmen delegate to one of the members of the Board of Selectmen currently as it stands without any charter change?
Delegate to them? No, I don't. Well, actually,
There
is language in the charter about delegating.
Well, I mean, they're ex officio,
they can go to any meeting they
but
want.
if the Board of Selectmen are ex officio to all the boards and commissions, say, for example, right now, without any charter language, couldn't the first select person say, board member, could you attend, meeting A for me tonight because I want the thing we voted on or this thing that we did to be, talked about during that meeting?
Right, so that's a different question. I mean, sure, the first selectman can ask somebody from the Board of Selectmen to go attend, and they're ex officio on all boards. Delegation of the current charter to a select person requires RTM approval. So if he wanted to say, Brenda, I want you to be my designee on this board, that would require RTM approval.
Oh, I didn't mean all the time, like Christine's on the WPCA. I just, without any charter change right now, any select person can ask a select person to utilize their status and attend a meeting. Could they?
Yes, they can ask them to do it. It's...
Yes, Jerry.
A department head is an employee of the town. So in the instance where the administration, which wishes to go to a commission and proffer the administration's, argument, asking a town employee to do that on behalf of the administration is not necessarily an appropriate thing. That employee of the town goes from one administration to another administration to another administration. Now, they might articulate what their position is or how they see the function going, but what I saw your request to be is that in that instance, when I need an advocate, I need someone to be an advocate, I want to designate another person, a proxy, to go for me. And if you're going to make a department head an advocate, it's kind of taking them outside of their role. I mean, that's what I would think. I don't know that I'm speaking correctly or not, but I would not want to put my department heads in a position of being my advocate. I want them to discuss the ins and outs of what's going on. If I'm going to go there and I have to bang heads, I don't want a department head to have to bang heads. I mean, that's what I thought we were accomplishing in this regard. And we had a lot of discussion about this. It went back and forth quite a bit. And certainly, I think you answered the initial question appropriately. We didn't come up with this idea. This was a request, and we discussed it and vetted it. And certainly, I understand, any of the considerations that the select persons are bringing up. I mean, I get it. But I thought we fulfilled at least what the concept was. Whether or not the three of you agree on it, that's going to be up to you, I think.
No, I think you did fulfill the request, and now, they're quite, I think you fulfilled what I was hoping you would do, but my fellow select people are going in a different direction, so that's their prerogative. I agree with you, though, the department heads, unless they are ex officio on a board, and I think there are a couple boards where a department head is ex officio, I believe. I can't remember which ones, though. Is Parks and Rec ex officio?
I think DPW, ex officio, and Parks and Rec, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. There's a couple, it's not a lot. And then, in that case, they can do the same things, but there's not many like that. And you're right, I think a department head who works with a commission and in some ways reports to that commission is not in the same position, I think, to necessarily have the big picture for the whole town as opposed to that specific department. I think, as Ms. Kupchik had Tom Bremer as CAO, and right now I have David Becker as COO, and I believe she worked very, very closely with Tom Bremer on many, many issues. I worked very closely with David Becker on many issues, and they bring a perspective to the table of everything that's going on in town as opposed to a department head who is bringing a perspective of that department. And that's why I think, when I have someone who's my designee going to a meeting, if I can't make it, he's probably, that COO is probably in the best position, as the CAO probably was as well, in the best position to represent the first select person at a meeting. And again, a very demanding job, very complex town, and working through the numbers with your top people. Not every department head knows the numbers for the whole town and what if you do something in one place, how it might affect something in another place. And that's the advantage of having this person. I believe it would be very helpful, not always needed, but if you have the right person, you would feel comfortable letting that person go and represent you. And So I appreciate that you made the change, and we'll see, if I can't convince my fellow board members, then I guess, I'll have to, just accept what they want. But I appreciate you guys taking this up. Should we move on? I don't think we all, oh, yes, yes,
Just-
Christine.
Christine wants to ask something.
Yeah, just to the commission, I very much appreciate that you are doing what the Board of Selectmen asked you to do. I had these concerns from the start, and maybe I should have, forced the issue, at our first meeting, but I wanted to bring it to you, to have you discuss it, to see what your opinions were, to get legal advice on it, to see if you looked at any other municipalities that had a town government similar to ours, and see if they had ex officio. Did you do any of that work just for any kind of comps?
Is that one of the things that was compared to other towns, whether a person in this kind of role would be ex officio on boards? I don't think that was a question.
I don't think that piece, though.
Yeah.
I think ultimately we had a lot of debate on this issue, and ultimately I think, and I can't remember if we did or not look at comps, but ultimately I think that our opinions were so strong, they probably wouldn't have left room for other opinions from, other towns. Like we went back and forth even at the last minute, and we put in that clarification about without vote. I remember that discussion, but just really quickly before we move on, regarding the department heads, I completely agree with Jerry on that. Just obviously it's in your field now. You guys could debate this at your next meeting, but regarding department heads, I mean, when I served on conservation, I always viewed that department head as sort of the technical expert. And I just personally think it would be really strained and awkward for them to present so if Tim's coming to us and saying, we could get this open space for $10,000 and it's 6 acres and it has all this value, it has wetlands, it has biodiversity, it has this stand of trees and blah, blah, and he paints this great picture and that's his opinion because he's a biologist, then to caveat that with, oh, and by the way, Bill doesn't want to spend the $24,000, but it would just be awkward. I personally think, but that's not to say there isn't another solution there. I wouldn't support the department head acting as the proxy.
Yeah,
Well, I would just throw in, listen, I couldn't attend every meeting either, but I would make a phone call to the chairman, if I was concerned about a project, say PCA, or if I was concerned about rates. What were you guys, I hope you guys aren't gonna raise, people's rates like an incredible amount. You maybe can't go to the meeting, but you can certainly call the chairperson and share your opinion and your view. And to be honest with you, department heads, at least under my administration, worked with me closely. I listened to them. So if Tim Bishop said, that's a great piece of property and we should buy it, and we made that decision, he'd be sharing that in the meeting. But I'd be curious to know what commissions are we talking about? Because you have your CFO at the Board of Finance and your budget director. You have, maybe I could see the RTM, so to speak, because I don't think there is anybody the administration there. If it's not the first select person, but the town attorney, or attorneys. But I can't think of really any commission, because most of them, you got Anthony at the Park and Rec, you've got, I never really felt like bash anybody, or hit heads or whatever that comment was. My opinion, or what we're looking, or maybe some, so what commissions are we talking about exactly? Like that there was maybe a problem in the past that brought this to light or concern?
No, not
specific.
I wouldn't say it's a problem. I just think this would be an enhancement. And I do think it's important to have the chief financial officer at Board of Finance meetings, but the chief financial officer, at least in the current setup, doesn't know the massive projects as well as the COO. So I would love the COO to be at the table in a Board of Finance meeting as well. And, you can always ask to be at the table, but, depending on who is chairing the meeting, they may or may not allow him to be. But having the chief operating officer who's in charge of construction management as well, $500 million of projects, having them at the Board of Finance meeting would be helpful as ex officio. At RTM meetings would be helpful. And there are many, solid waste and recycling. It's been, it would be helpful. I could think of examples probably for many boards and commissions. So, but I think we should probably move on because I don't think anyone is going to be moving off their opinions on this. I'll take whatever the board decides.
Great. Well, thank you. Great input, great conversation here. The next topic here is adding a chief of staff role, which would allow the first select person to focus on larger, more strategic town issues and opportunities. That's Article 6, Section 2, Paragraph D. And so specifically staff, it says that the first select person is entitled to appoint a chief of staff and other administrative assistants, et cetera.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you did this. I think this was part of the last administration's, charter revision. And, there was some resistance to this, but I do think it solidifying the chief of staff role in the charter, it is an essential role for any administration. And I think it's been politicized in the past where in the past there was one, RTM majority that cut the role and made it very, probably made it harder for the administration. But, I don't think I asked you to do, but I think you're doing it. I appreciate this. I wasn't against it in the last attempted charter revision either. I think it's an essential role that should not be politicized. So I would support this.
Agreed.
Agree.
Okay, so we agreement on it. Okay, great. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next one is also in Article 6. It refers to the Board of Select Person contractual approval, so 6(1)(c)(1). And per the request, we did look at the types of contracts that from a dollar value and duration that are required to come before this board for approval. And I did increase that to be now a duration of one, where you as a board, you can choose to delegate authority to other town officers, employees, bodies for contracts that have a duration of 1 year or less, or involve an expenditure or income of a town of $50,000 or less. So in other words, more than a year comes to this board, more than $50,000 comes to this board. The things lower than those amounts could in fact be delegated by this board.
It has to be both. We say a duration of 1 year or less and an expenditure of $50,000 or less.
Good point. Thank you for that clarification. Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy that you made this change, and it's been quite onerous at Board of Selectmen meetings to follow the charter the way it's currently written with the number of approvals that we have to make because of the volume of contracts that fall under the current guidelines. And so, yeah, I agree with this change. Any questions or comments, Christine?
Just thank you for making the change. We spend a lot of time, and as much as I've learned a lot by having approved all of these contracts over the last year and a half. It would be nice just to have the time in our meetings just to focus on some other things. So thank you for taking this up.
$10,000 isn't what it used to be.
Well, one of the things we may be focusing on potentially in section or Article 6.2A8, which outlines first select person responsibilities, we've added the requirement that the first select person prepare and maintain a 10-year capital plan and submit it annually to the Board of Finance for the Board of Finance to approve the plan's first year of the 10-year. I think it's important that the town look forward to plan for future growth or anticipated changes. Thus, we added the requirement for capital planning.
What number is that on your summary?
It is under it's the last bullet under increased focus of ensuring town operations are effective and efficient. And it refers back to 6.2A8.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was great. And it's been a long time coming, so I think that's a really good change.
Looks like Ms. Vitale has.
Yes, Christine?
I support this. I just question whether or not it should come to the Board of Selectmen first, just because for projects, we're first in line for approving capital projects before it even gets to the Board of Finance. So to have a 10-year capital plan, the Board of Finance is in essence approving projects, committing to projects, and the Board of Selectmen may or may not agree with them. So just wondering if you discussed that and to, wondering what the first Selectman and Ms. Kupchik think about the Board of Selectmen's role. Absolutely appreciate the Board of Finance, driving this in terms of, managing our debt and looking at our cash flow. Appreciate that they are the body that should be really doing the deep dive on this, but it seems that just for the funding approval, the Board of Selectmen, I asked for the capital plan to come before us this past summer, not for approval, but just for a review, just so we're all on the same page, because I would hate for there to be all this work and then the Board of Selectmen not being supportive of it when the projects come before us.
Just to answer the question, great suggestion. No, as a charter, we did not consider that great suggestion. Pass it over to Mr. Gerber, though, for comment.
Yeah. I mean, the individual projects, like you said, Christine, would come before the Board of Selectmen. And the capital plan, I guess if it comes before the Board of Selectmen, there'd be potentially a debate about the individual projects on the capital plan at the Board of Selectmen table before the projects come to the Board of Selectmen. But I thought of this capital plan really more as, coming to the Board of Finance, really more as a finance debt service sort of calculation as to whether or not the town can afford that level of debt service. So, yeah, I don't know what the right answer is. I think it can go either way. If you bring the capital plan to the Board of Selectmen and you debate the projects, you might be putting the cart before the horse, because some of the projects are, not fleshed out yet. It's sort of a high-level look, but there's probably no harm in bringing it, in front. There's no harm in bringing it in front of. I mean, we've done it, and bringing it to the Board of Selectmen. But the requirement in the charter, whether or not that should be a requirement to bring it to the Board of Selectmen in the charter. I'm not sure we need it necessarily, but the requirement to have a 10-year capital plan, that I think is a good add. So I don't know. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Could I just jump in? I mean, the town always used to do joint Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance waterfall meetings once a year, where the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance jointly the presentation of the 10-year waterfall. I think they used to delegate an RTM member from each party to sort of be the liaison for the RTM. They would join in and be able to ask questions as well. I mean, I thought that always worked
Yeah,
pretty
well,
well.
and that's
everybody
usually,
got it presented to them.
I think that's later in the year. Usually it's in August, September.
September, yeah.
I think what this is, first of all, it's requiring it to be done in the charter, which is, and yeah, we do that, and we did do it this year. We had a joint capital planning session at the Board of Finance, or was it Board of Selectmen? I can't remember, but it was the Fire Training Center where we did it, right? So that has been the practice.
So could that be codified in the charter, that a joint meeting shall be held of the Board of Selectmen and Finance to present a 10-year capital plan once a year? Updated 10-year capital plan?
Prior to Board of Finance approval. Like, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, the yearly waterfall. I mean, that's not the same thing as when projects come. It's like gives an overview. And then you have the 2 RTM members, which I always thought was beneficial because they have to vote on it too. I mean, that could be in the charter. It's something the town always did anyway.
Yeah, we did it this past year.
And then that way everybody gets to hear it. You know, all the town bodies who vote on the projects get to hear it at the same time, and they get to hear each other's questions and input. And then I think it minimizes the questions when these projects do actually come before the independent boards.
Well, and just prioritizing what potentially comes first. And I think that decision, part of Selectmen should definitely be a part of. And I think that if the Board of Finance votes, I wouldn't want the Board of Selectmen to actually not be able to move a project forward because the capital plan was approved by the Board of Finance with select projects that the Board of Selectmen didn't have input in as the executive branch. But absolutely agree with you in terms of the debt service and what we can afford, like that lies with the Board of Finance.
Okay, so we should take a look at this and come up with a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not averse to, fleshing that out a little bit, to make sure that the parties that should be there are. As long as, any thoughts on your guys' part? Or?
My first thought was that Selectman Vitale's observation was the one you kind of mimicked, though. If you don't bring it to the Board of Selectmen first, then you are putting the cart before the horse. If you go to the Board of Finance, have them approve it, and then it has to come back to the Board of Selectmen. So you might be better served by having the Board of Selectmen look at the plan and approve what's being submitted to the Board of Finance. It might be the better process.
I have to think through that, though, because it would be hard to approve it. Sometimes they won't want to approve it unless the Board of Finance approves the debt service, limits first, and whether or not it's too much or not enough. Yeah.
That's why you do it together in a joint meeting.
Yeah, we could, I guess, mandate a joint meeting. We do have joint meetings every year, capital project workshop, joint meeting. not in the charter, and, yeah. All right, let's take a look at what we would like to add or adjust. I'm open to suggestions.
If anything, you're flexible. If anything, you're flexible.
I'm flexible on this because I think it's great. I think it's important to have capital planning in the charter, and not just leave it up to an administration to do. Yeah, it really is necessary. Okay.
Agree. Just want it to be successful and as, smooth as possible. So if there's anything that we can do just to clarify that for future boards, well, I'm looking to do. Appreciate the ad. I think it's a good one. And
Yeah.
absolutely, again, Board of Finance, I see their role. Just want to make sure that the flow is going.
I want to take a
well.
look at the last proposed charter too, because I think there was a lot of discussion around this in the last charter, and I can't recall what they proposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That one might have been about timing, like when it needed to be done, either before or after the budget. But yeah, you're right, Bill. Mr. Gerber.
I remember a lot of
Yeah.
discussion about it. Yeah. Okay.
So then the next section, we clarified the water pollution control accountabilities. This refers to Article 9, paragraph 28, and also Article 10, paragraph 12. In Article 928, that adds the general manager of the WPC utility as a appointed position, appointed by this board, and reporting to the first select person. And then specifically in Article 10, paragraph 12, we then detail the responsibilities of the WPC facility versus the board versus the sewer department and the town, and with the eye towards ensuring both short and long-term issues are addressed, given the importance of the sewer, the water, and also the financial implications of those, especially with the longer term.
Very much appreciated. The amount of work that you put into this. Thank you. Christine?
No, I just want to echo that thanks to the commission, Mr. Gerber, to you, to your staff, to Ms. Gore. This is an important.
Yes, and I would say the general manager and DPW director were extremely helpful in the technical aspects of this to developers.
Thank you to Mr. Marcilio as well. I did question just WPCA, given some of the suggested adds to having a member of the engineering department, the town engineer, sit on the WPCA, being that there was that addition, if there was a suggestion of whether having a selectman also serve was still needed. WPCA thought that it was. I don't know if the commission had any, I apologize that I missed that meeting, had any discussion about whether or not, given these changes, whether or not you still think there needs to be a member of the Board of Selectmen on WPCA. Not looking to get out of it, just given the change, appreciate that now, would be taking up a seat that potentially would be going to a town resident.
I don't remember that
I
we
don't
had
think
the
we
discussion.
discussed that.
I don't think we did.
I think you missed the meeting and you stayed on.
It's fine.
Volunteer to attend every meeting for snooze.
I don't think we discussed that.
Okay.
But I do, the town engineer will.
Right, so the town engineer will be taking a seat. A member of the Board of Selectmen will be taking a seat. The size of the commission is not increasing. So I just wanted to put it really, just raise the issue to the commission and to my colleagues. If you have any thoughts about whether or not there should be any changes in terms of representative of the Board of Selectmen. still serving on that commission. As I said, I mentioned it to the commission. They thought that it would be helpful just in terms of advocating for the commission, both to the Board of Selectmen and other town bodies. But figured I would raise it now while we're talking about it, just in case anybody, if it hadn't been mentioned or thought of, bring it to you guys as well.
Well, I think the way it's written is really helpful. Yeah, I was just going to say, we have an incredibly, we're fortunate to have an incredibly talented civil engineer on the commission right now. He's terming out. It's been really hard finding engineers to be on this commission. And so having the town engineer join is going to be very, very helpful. But having a select person with a different perspective as the town, much broader perspective of the town is helpful. I mean, it's helpful having you on, Christine. I think it's a different perspective. I see no issue with having both on.
Okay, thank you. And
not an easy commission to fill. It's very demanding, as you know. Yeah.
No, and I think the addition of the town engineer is a great add. Just wanted to, being that the number of residents will be decreasing by one, just wanted to raise it here to make sure that we were in agreement.
I mean, it's such a technical.
I would agreed. Like, I'm not advocating for a change.
Yeah.
Just wanted to raise the issue, just to have it on the table so we could.
I'm sorry, Ms. Kupchak, you were.
Yeah, I would say that, listen, it's kind of been hit or miss over the years. We've had select people who've attended a lot of them, and then we've had select people who never went to hardly any. So kind of have to let it go in the future. And I hadn't really thought about it till you just brought it up, Christine. But I mean, we'd had select person they maybe went to 3, in 4 years, meetings. So, I think, I'm hearing you say, if a Board of Select person did go off, it would open it up to an opportunity to have a more technical person, right? Maybe potentially we have now, that, he's great and we were lucky to get him, but he's going to term out. I don't know, because you got to look at the charter as a, long-term thing. The next select person who's appointed, and typically, I hate to say this to you, Christine, it's always appointed to the minority member because it's almost like a punishment. I'm just telling you the truth.
I don't view it that way. I've learned so much. I've learned so much.
No, I know. I'm just adding color. I've been around a long time. I grew up in town. I'm just saying that, the charter is for the future. And if, for example, the next administration appoints the minority member and they don't go, they don't have to go, right? They're kind of pointed to it. So I don't know. I think it's something for the commission, the CRC. And I do want to point out that, putting the town engineer on it is a great thing, but the town engineer is on the Bike and Ped Committee. They're on, I think they even go to the solid waste and recycling. They go to a lot of night meetings, and then they have to go to the Board of Finance meetings and the RTM meetings. And so it's a lot for, just a department head who has to go to all now these night meetings. It is a lot for them, and they don't get anything extra for doing it. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and that's just my 2 cents.
I have a question about the format tonight. Are we going to keep going until we're through the summary, or do we want to adjourn at some point and take it up at the next meeting? I don't want to burn anyone out.
Or maybe pick up
Oh,
the rest.
Public hearing is in 2 days.
Bill,
We have
you
a
want to
public.
maybe pick up the rest Wednesday?
Yeah, and we have a public hearing.
Thursday.
Oh, it says on the agenda that
We're taking,
we have a meeting and a public hearing
Public hearing's
Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I'm thinking.
So Unfortunately, I feel like
Is it meeting and public hearing, or is it, I'm looking.
You want to get through it all? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going, because, yeah, with the public hearing on Wednesday, people should have the opportunity to hear this discussion, I guess.
and I mean, I think it'd be nice for you to, the board to hear and express your initial questions and opinions
Okay.
on these points. But thank you for the inputs there. The next key area is approving the town's ability to hire great talent. The first section refers to Article 9, 1B, and that specifically requires the Director of Human Resources to maintain job descriptions, essentially, based on national standards and relevant best practices for all the town offices defined in the charter. Once again, 9, 1B. Then the next topic specifically refers to the requirements for the town engineer, and that is within 9.7, which under the Director of Public Works. And we're recommending that we require the town engineer, defining that as that person, that role as the chief technical advisor for the town, reporting to the director of the DPW, and requiring said town engineer to have a professional engineering license from the state of Connecticut. That's 9.7B3, where that is located. Then we jump down to Article 3, which gets at a residency requirement, essentially. And in Article 3, 1A, we recommend changing the elector, so residency requirement for potential chiefs of fire and police to a distance of 35 miles from Fairfield. So removing the elector requirement of within town limits, but ensuring that they are still in close enough proximity to provide the appropriate leadership. We've also removed in that same section of 3.1A, also removed the elector, the residency requirement for town attorney, assistant town attorneys, and assistant town attorneys, I should say.
So should we take these up, the ones that you've talked through? So,
Sure.
I think all of these were very much in line with what was brought to the people in the last charter revision and passed by the last Charter Revision Commission. So I would ask, I'm in agreement with all of the changes that you made. First of all, the qualifications based on national standards, it should go without saying, but I think it doesn't hurt to have that in the charter, and I think that's what was put in the last go-around. The town engineer not being required to be a Connecticut certified PE, I agree with that as well, and I think
Required.
He is required to be.
I'm sorry.
Shift the current requirement is the director of DPW.
I'm sorry, director of DPW not being required to be a Connecticut certified professional engineer, I think is the right move. Whereas we have a town engineer who is a Connecticut certified engineer. This was also put forward last time, and I agree with it. And it's very much in line with the qualifications on national standards. To be head of DPW, there are many things to consider. And being a professional engineer, in my experience, is not top of the list. You have to be able to manage people. You have to be able to manage projects. And I would assume that Ms. Kupchik agrees with that, because I think you were supportive of that last time around. John Marsilio, who's about to retire, has a significant amount of experience managing people and projects. There's a lot of things that professional engineers don't deal with that are required to be head of DPW. So being a professional engineer does not necessarily qualify you to be head of DPW. There's so many factors involved with that. And I would say, from what I understand, engineers take different paths, and sometimes they go into project management, managing large groups of people, and sometimes they do become technical, very technical engineers. Being technical, a technical engineer does not qualify you to manage, 100 people and deal with contractors and all that. You might be able to design a project, but that is just a part of the job, and you should be able to rely on your town engineer. And so I agree with that completely. But I know last charter revision, there were some in town that didn't, and they'll have an opportunity to voice their opinions. For the distance requirements, I think, and not being an elector, as a town attorney, not having to be an elector, that was also recommended with the last proposed charter revision, and I think had unanimous agreement. And the distance requirements for chiefs of fire and police to have to be electors in the town, to be residents of the town, that doesn't make sense in this day and age, especially with the cost of housing in Fairfield. And if you're going to hire someone that lives in an adjacent town or two adjacent towns over, they can get here within a reasonable period of time. To force them to uproot their families and to buy a house in Fairfield, or for me, the form over substance solution is to have a chief, rent an apartment and spend time in a rented apartment just to pass this requirement. That limits the pool of people that will be willing to come to Fairfield, and it really is form over substance, in my opinion. So I agree with all of these. Any comments from other board members?
I'm in agreement also.
Yes, I feel like you said my exact comments about the DP director qualifications. And it's stunning to me the amount of pushback about that. They are totally different jobs, but I hope that piece stays in. All of this is good. One question I do have. This last one, removed ambiguity of removal process in terms of office for most town officers by removing defined terms and allowing removal without cause. What is that?
Sure, that was something we didn't get to yet, and we want to make sure.
I thought that might be the most complicated one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the background here is it's from history. There have been different interpretation on terms of department heads, other town officers and such, as far as some may have had a defined term, many did not. Sometimes interpreted as it would end when the first selectman's term ended. Other times it interpreted as they're indefinite until they want to leave. And the overall assessment is that we thought it was impractical to say, hey, you're tied to the first selectman and you have to resign and then get reappointed every 4 years. That seemed impractical. However, in the interest of ensuring accountability in an efficient and effective town, we also thought that allowing department heads or other town officers to have an indefinite term with only removal for cause created a situation where it was maybe a potential lack of accountability over the long term to ensure that we could really ensure that the town is getting the great quality talent consistently over the long term that it deserves. And so after a long debate, what we settled on was, and it's for the most part, there's a couple of specific differences, but in general, the language in Article 9 for the different roles says the role may be removed without cause by the first select person, if by the appointing authority. The one I'm reading is the first select person appointing authority, and shall serve until removal, retirement, or resignation, where it clarifies that there's no definite term, but it also ensures that there is a removal mechanism if the appointing authority deems that's the best move. to ensure the town receives the service it needs. So that's what that one means, and yes, expected there would be some discussion around this one.
So I agree with you. There's been a lot of ambiguity around this. I believe a former town attorney had an opinion
So
that,
just to be clear, I know each of the,
we can't hear you, Brenda. You're freezing up. I don't know if you can hear us, but your video and
oh,
voice-
yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you, but then you froze up again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
No?
yes.
Okay, sorry, I feel like a Verizon commercial. So I'm fine with removing the terms of the department heads, but I know that the charter always said, I think you had 60 days, up to 60 days to remove a department head, which I don't think anybody's ever done. Except for in the areas of criminal activity or if someone was arrested or something like that. But right
You might
here
want
it
to
says
confirm that,
allowing,
Brenda.
it says allowing here in this line, allowing removal without cause. So that, I mean, to remove someone without cause, we would never get anybody to come to work in our town ever again, because it would be a political thing. The department heads would be like, I'm not gonna go work there because the next first select person would just fire me without cause. I mean, is this a mistake without cause, or?
No, it is not a mistake.
I don't get that part.
It is in the view of our commission, in order to have indefinite terms, you need then a removal mechanism. That's.
But with cause,
And the person may never leave
no?
50 years, right? If you have to wait for cause, you may have somebody working there for 40 years who really is not effective anymore. And in the private sector.
No, I agree, Karen. I think the way the charter was set up, though, it had, you have a 60-day window.
No, I don't think so. Brenda, I think you're referring to an opinion written by a town attorney, but I don't think the charter said 60 days, did it, Phil?
So the charter, I don't want to comment too much on this because this is actually in litigation.
Oh, okay.
So,
But the charter doesn't say you have 60 days, does it?
I don't really want to comment too much on
Okay.
this because it's in litigation.
I guess that could be an interpretation of what the charter.
Right now, I'll say this, right now, that issue
Right,
is.
but just, I understand what you're saying, Karen, but, all right, so for example, all right, so I understand if there's somebody who's been in the job a long time, I get it. There are mechanisms and there are programs, early retirement, there are different things you can do, but I personally think this is, and I know from hearing from department heads, because I didn't realize this was the same thing, that this was discussed. Department heads would feel no sense of security in their job. They would feel like if they didn't do what the new administration told them to, if they didn't toe the line, if they disagreed. It's so hard to get talent in government, we had to pay so much money to recruiters to get good people for a couple of department head positions. I don't know who would come here knowing that at the change of administration, you would just be out of a job. I think that's going to have a chilling effect on our ability to hire.
Yeah, if I
And
may,
chilling effect on morale.
I've heard the same comments from department heads, and I think there are some that are concerned about this. For the record, this wasn't something that I don't think any of us asked for this. This was something the commission thought was in line with best practices, but I don't know if it's workable. in terms of being able to hire people. You certainly don't want a situation where people fear that they're not going to last through another administration, that a new administration will wipe the slate clean. So I definitely think we should talk through this. I'm a little uncomfortable with it. Yeah, I don't know. I know it certainly could be abused, but I think some cities, maybe do abuse this. So it's not totally outside the realm of comprehension that. But I would ask Commissioner McCann, what are you seeing in other towns in terms of the guardrails on exiting people? And
There are a lot of towns that have department head positions that serve at the pleasure of the mayor or first select person. It's not entirely uncommon. And having worked in one of those positions, I could tell you it's something that there's a period of time around the elections where there's just uncertainty in the job. But
as a town attorney,
I was, my particular experience was as a town.
That we're sort of used to. Town attorneys usually a selection of the first select person of the mayor, but like a head of.
Staff.
There were also, where I was town attorney, there were also 3 or 4 department heads that served at the pleasure of the mayor.
Okay.
And I remember it not being uncommon when we looked into that. I mean, maybe uncommon for smaller towns, but not uncommon for larger towns or cities. The other thing is that we have in here a provision that says the removal of any town employee shall be subject to any additional terms and conditions of any employment agreement or collective bargaining agreement that may exist. So,
Right.
I mean, one way to alleviate some of those concerns would be to have a specific employment agreement with those department heads,
Right.
if you chose.
What do you see as the alternative? If you're not going to have a term of employment for a department head, then our suggestion is you're going to have the reality that everyone else in the world lives with. You're an employee at will. And as long as I've lived in this town, the one thing that I've always appreciated is that anybody who's smart enough to get elected for a selectman is smart enough to know you don't get rid of your department heads, because they're the people that run your town. And if you're looking to create a storm, then you go and cut your legs out from under yourself. I certainly sympathize with the feedback you're getting from department heads.
Yeah.
But if you have a term of service for 4 years, then that person effectively has a contract of employment for 4 years. And then you can't terminate somebody unless you terminate them for cause. And the ability to terminate for cause is going to lead you to litigation. So, you have a Hobson's choice here. You're either going to have some element of reality check, or you're going to continue down a path which maybe not be beneficial. That's up to you guys.
And just a clarifying point, you did ask us to review terms of office. I think potentially your intent was maybe more defining with a number of years.
Yeah,
Outlined for reasons outlined, we went another direction.
No, and I appreciate what you did. I just, what my original intent was, I thought it was strange that certain people, like the tax assessor, like every X number of years, you got to reappoint them when, it seemed odd, tax collector, or when they're employees and you wouldn't get rid of them unless there was cause. But
We fully expect this one would drive additional discussion.
yeah.
But I think Jerry expressed it very well as far as essence of our discussion.
Yeah, most of us are employees at will. Most people in the country are. So
Yeah.
maybe it's possible, and we don't know this, that for government employees, that's less common and it would be harder to find people, I don't know. But it could also be that they just haven't been working in that situation before.
Yeah, most employees in the country are at will, but to get great, I mean, usually working in the municipal government, you're probably not going to make as much as work in the private sector. It's a different animal. I don't know, I've heard concern about it from department heads, and I would definitely need to,
I mean, maybe we could put terms back in. I mean, if that makes people feel better, put the 4-year term, whatever the terms were.
the terms seem
Because
pretty
yes,
random.
in the real world, you can get fired, but you get fired for cause, not just because someone doesn't like you or,
But if you have a
you know,
term,
I
you know,
mean, I don't know. I think that I can't vote for this the way this is.
Actually, in the real world, you can get fired because your boss doesn't like you.
yeah.
I mean, it's not necessarily a nice place to work, but that is the real world.
Well, you can sue them, you know, yeah. I mean,
Anybody can sue anybody,
yeah.
you know, I make a living at that.
Thank goodness for you, right, Jerry?
I don't know. I don't see, I mean,
No, and
I don't know, was there a lot of problems? I didn't really see it,
we empathize with your position.
you know,
there's no question
getting rid of
about
somebody
that.
who was not performing.
Okay. I don't think we're gonna solve this tonight necessarily, but I definitely want to put some thought into this because, and I will ask around and look at other towns and, but I've heard some concern from department heads and I can see why, every 4 years they're worried and we don't necessarily want to make everyone worried. We don't want people to leave prior to giving a new person a chance to, and, just, yeah, okay.
Great, so I'm sure we'll be discussing this one again.
Yeah, this one
Maybe
is
we can
is
move
a
on.
big one, yeah, thank you.
Great, so the next section are modernizing the charter. I've gotten a lot of feedback on this first one, that we allow the town seal to be changed by RTM ordinance. The town seal is in today in the charter as, there you have it, Exhibit A. And if the RTM passes an ordinance to develop or choose a new seal, that is now allowed.
And our thinking, I think, was that there's 40 members representing people all over town, and that might be a good body to do that.
Or you can have a contest.
And
This could be a contest, this could be a lot of fun. I mean, this seal doesn't really represent today's Fairfield.
Right.
And that's 14.1, by the way, that's where that's noted.
Yeah, and I believe the last
Pavilion.
The last town charter also voted to do something similar, so this isn't a new concept, so. Any questions or comments on this? All right.
I 100% agree. I think that seal does not reflect what really happened with the Native Americans, and I don't think it should be our seal
Agreed.
at all.
I think that there's a teacher at Ludlow that has a whole course around the seal and why it makes no sense. Yeah. Okay.
So the next section is, we provided the ability to remove the requirement to publish in local newspapers notices of meetings and ordinance when and if it's allowed by state law. Today, state law does still require publishing in local newspapers in certain instances. The language would now say that we will follow state law and do that if required. But otherwise, put it on the website.
Thank you. I believe this was in the last proposed order as well. It's going to save us some money.
When the Connecticut statutes change so we still have to follow the law. But then we are suggesting that you require a charter review process every 10 years. You'll notice there's a lot of little cleanup we're doing in this charter revision, and part of that's due to the fact that it hasn't, the current charter dates from 2006. And so I think that's a good opportunity. That's in 14.4B is where that is located. This next one, and please stop me if you want to discuss or.
These are all
Questions?
familiar,
Okay.
I think.
The next one is a recommendation from the town clerk, removing the 10 annual meeting requirement for all boards, commissions, recognizing that each board commission is unique. 10.1.B.1. And that is really reflecting the fact that most boards and commissions will still be required to publish a regular meeting schedule. I think it's in December of each year for the upcoming year, but doesn't require them to have meetings just to meet a meeting count. We are recommending that we update selectmen and chairmen to the general neutral terms of select person and chairperson throughout the document. And then there are the last two are removing really antiquated requirements. One was an assessment system that was paper-based. I think it's relating to real estate assessments, if I remember correctly, in 8.3D. Well, that's the current charter, 8.3D. That's being removed. And then there was also a requirement in 5.3 of the current charter that requires surety bonds for certain town officers, which has been replaced by different.
Director, D&O insurance, it's insurance.
Yes. So, any questions on that section?
No, not I.
Great, then on the last section, addressing known issues of key boards and commissions, we looked for consistency where possible here and standardized boards and commissions to a 2-term limit with a 1-year waiting period before potential reappointment to additional terms. Like the biggest variance, for example, there was a 5-year waiting period for the Golf Commission, as an example. That's in 3.1.
Waiting time to get a tea time.
It is, I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah, there may have been a reason for that, actually, right?
Golf is different.
We also, in 2.3D, clarified the start of the term of office for newly elected RTM members. That was a request from the town clerk, and also from the moderator and other members of the RTM. Working on the suggestions as a basis for this from the Fire Commission, we modernized Fire Commission responsibilities, and that's 10.5B.
Yes.
We also working with the town librarian and recommendations that were actually contained in the 2002 suggested revisions. We did adjust the Board of Library Trustees' responsibilities and change that term from 1 6-year term with no reappointment to a 3-year term with the potential for reappointment for a second term. So could still have 6 years. And that was in line exactly with the librarian and the Board of Library Trustees' recommendations. Working with the Human Services Commission Head and Human Services Director, we revised Human Services Commission to absorb responsibilities of the expiring Committee on Disabilities and also reflect some of the changes recently made within the town structure. That's 10.15.
The Commission on Disabilities, though, Phil, didn't we re-up that commission? I thought we reapproved for that because it expired, and I thought we extended it, but maybe this will supersede. So this was Julie DeMarco's recommendation. Okay.
Yes.
To absorb it into the.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, definitely worked with Mr. Marco on that.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
And then we updated the Flood Prevention Commission name and responsibilities as required by Connecticut statutes. That's 10.11. And then we appointed all Board of Education members as ex officio members of the RTM in line with how Board of Finance members are treated. That's 4.2A. And essentially today, Board of Finance, all members are ex officio in the RTM. Only the Board of Ed chairperson is an ex officio member of the RTM. And then we referenced this briefly earlier, but required identification of a town employee as liaison for each board and commission, 10.1.d. And the idea behind that is, particularly in some of maybe the smaller commissions, the less visible commissions, ensuring that the commissioners and board members, who are generally volunteers, town residents, have an ability to access the town bureaucracy and kind of understand how to work with the town. It is not adding any type of ex officio membership or requirement for going to meetings or anything like that, but it just ensuring that the boards and commissions have a way to have an advocate or talk to someone within the town. And in many cases, that liaison is already really identified through the structure.
Yeah.
There probably are some boards and commissions.
Right?
We didn't go through and look at all the ordinance-based, the town code-based commissions and such.
Okay.
There may be some there as an example. I don't know, Mary, if you had other thoughts on which ones. We don't think it's necessarily a widespread issue, but I think it's important to ensure that if our town residents are taking the time to serve on a board and commission, that they should have some help in really ensuring they can, work with quote-unquote City Hall.
I think of one that doesn't have a town.
I think we heard from like Flood and Erosion Control Board that the town attorney doesn't regularly attend.
The town attorney or
Oh, the
the?
town engineer.
Engineer, the town engineer.
I'm sorry. I said attorney.
Town engineer, right, Brent?
The town engineer.
Yeah.
But it's also, some boards have to process payment, and if you don't have that town liaison, it's getting access to the town.
Yeah.
They should all have a point person, I think.
That's really the
I
point.
mean,
Because also then, they're focused on their part of things versus the town employee has a much broader view, so it brings a
Yeah,
context. So it goes
I'm
both
sure
ways.
flood and erosion calls Bill Hurley all the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
But I don't know if he may not be the official point person, so that would just make it official. Not necessarily that he has to go to every meeting, hopefully.
And that's the point, it's just a liaison.
Right.
We specifically say it's around facilitating communication between such board or commission and the
Right.
first select person's office. There's no expectation on membership of committees.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense.
That is the end of the
I would,
recommendation.
just throw out,
Yep.
consider, I know that, and it's good to have liaisons from the town, but, to my point earlier, some of these town department heads are liaisons to a lot of boards, and they don't get any stipend, any additional, so maybe the administration would like to think about something like that, if we're gonna put all this additional responsibility on people to be out.
Yeah, I think we are gonna have to think about that, yep.
Agree.
Depending on the amount of work, yeah. Okay. There was one question, so that was the end of your bullet points, Eric?
Yes.
I mean, I just have one question before I thank you profusely again. In the last Charter Revision Commission, they put forward a recommendation that, the Board of Education, every 2 years, I call it midterm, but in the middle cycle, there's only 4 open seats. And the way it's worked is the parties can put up 2 people each, and they're automatically, because there's 4 open seats, and whoever the parties put up are automatically on the Board of Ed, because you can't win more than 2 seats. And last Charter Revision Commission, they aligned it with the Board of Finance, where during that cycle you could win 3 of the 4 seats, so that which would allow the Board of Ed, it would be a competitive race, and then it could be a 6-3 board. Right now, it can never be more than the 5-4 board unless something happens, somebody steps down and there's an interim appointment. But you talked about that, right?
Yes, we did talk about this at length. We also Chair DeWitt did also seek input from the RTC and DTC on this, because the parties had an opinion there. But at a high level, there were 2 points. I think there was a recognition that changing, as you point out, First Selectman Gerber, could improve the election, the competitiveness of the election. However, the general sense was we felt like the Board of Education seemed to work effectively as it does today, and we worried about the unintended consequences of making the change to, yes, fix how the election works, but then does that come at the expense potentially of how the Board of Education actually functions? But absolutely willing to reconsider it if that's what the Board of Selectmen requests us to do. We can definitely look at that again.
Yeah, Christine, yeah.
I respectfully ask that you reconsider this. I actually, as I mentioned before, when I first served on the Board of Education, I was replacing somebody who was replacing somebody else. Mr. Calabrese was on the Board of Education. He had to resign when he became the Director of Parks and Recreation. Mr. Asa filled his role. At the next municipal election, Mr. Asa chose to run for a 4-year term. I ran to fill the remainder of that term, a 2-year term. It was a head-on race. I won that election, and at that particular 2-year period, there was a 6-3 majority on the Board of Education. I think that we, granted I'm biased, but I think that we work collaboratively in a bipartisan manner. I didn't see any issue with it, and I don't understand why there's different rules for the Board of Finance than for the Board of Education. If you feel that way about the Board of Education, you can make the exact same argument for the Board of Finance, and you should probably change them to a 5-4 also. As somebody who ran in the off years, in the competitive years, I think that really, to not have a race that's competitive, I don't think is really good government. I don't think it really forwards democracy. I think I would rather have it be competitive and potentially, let the people decide. And if those years, the people decide that they want to go in a different direction, the majority of the board might flip. It might be 5-4, it might be 6-3, but I would be much more comfortable putting that decision in the hands of the people rather than, it sounds like the subject matter experts in this case were totally political, the leaders of the 2 town committees. I don't know if they were in agreement, but I would rather take the politics out of this and really just put it to the voters.
Yeah, I mean, my observation on the Board of Ed, having observed it for many years, my wife was on it for 12 years. The Board of Ed members make strange bedfellows. It's not really a party-driven, hasn't been really a party-driven board. The Democrats and Republicans ally on issues, and you just never know, who's going to agree on what and who's going to be fighting who on what. As you can see, currently have a Democratic majority on the Board of Ed and a chair who's a Republican. So it's not necessarily, I don't think there's really unintended consequences, but I think the consequences, like Ms. Vitale said, I think there's really bad consequences of allowing, and this has happened, political party puts forward 2 candidates that would never win in a general election, but they win, in a primary because not a lot of people show up to a party primary. And so somebody rallies, a few hundred people, a few thousand people to vote for somebody, they end up automatically winning seats because they can only win 2. They put up 2 seats. They can't win less than 2. They can't win more than 2. So they put up 2 people and they win. That's happened, and it's pretty upsetting when it does happen. And yeah, I agree with Christine. I would like to see you guys reconsider this, but I don't think this should be up to the political parties because, yeah, I mean, that's what we'd like to remove the politics out, from it a little bit. But
Yeah.
and it was, there were a lot of things that people complained about last time around. This wasn't one of them. This had I think, unanimous support on the commission. I don't recall anyone writing in to complain about this. Maybe there's a way to check, but Christine, I don't recall anyone complaining about this change. I think it was universally accepted and supported, so.
Yeah, I don't recall that, and I can just attest, having served on the Board of Ed for 6 years, chaired it for 4. As you said, Mr. Gerber, it is very much issue-driven, and you never know who's going to land where. Sometimes when I think back, when we went on party lines, very often it might have been about budget, and that was more just fiscal policy than really the majority of the work that the Board of Ed does on a daily basis in terms of facilities planning, curriculum development, hiring the superintendent of schools, evaluation of the superintendent. So I really would ask you to reconsider this.
As I recall it, it was exactly the 2 political parties that said this didn't need to be fixed. So we just took that consensus and moved forward in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess it's one political party that thought they
I
could.
don't mean that as a negative either. That
Yeah.
was, we reached out for input.
Yeah.
Was for.
One party wanted it because they thought they could pick up the seed, and another party might.
It was split.
thought they couldn't pick up the seed.
It was split.
Yeah,
Party
okay.
front. But obviously, we appreciate the feedback. We'll wait until there's official feedback, I believe, the end of this
Okay.
month. We're hearing you loud and clear that this is likely to be one you'll ask us to reconsider, and we'll absolutely do that if that's the case.
Yeah, and again,
And I would just piggyback on the same comments that Bill and Christine said. I was on the Board of Ed for 6 years as well. And I, as a Republican, voted for a Democrat chair against a Republican chair because I didn't agree with the Republican on a lot of issues. So, it's a very open board. You attach to issues. The good old days, I'd like to say.
That's great feedback.
Can I just bring up 2 points that I didn't hear brought up, that I just was looking through my notes from the last charter. There was
Sure.
the recommendation for the last charter that said the term of the tree warden was increased from 1 year to 2 years to reflect what's written in the state statutes. Did you
Yes, that
guys
has been, that was
Look
done.
at that from the old,
Didn't we make no term?
You guys made
great, and then,
So just to
and then,
clarify,
I'm just looking.
yes, we discussed that, but then that is also covered under the fact that there's no term. So now it's an indefinite term, subject to removal without cause by the appointing authority. And so the tree warden would serve until removal, resignation, or retirement, as it's currently addressed.
I would
So we
just check with the state statute. Because
State
I
statute
think
is-
there is a state statute
There is a state
with
statute.
tree wardens.
Yes, there is, but under home rule, the charter can supersede that, so it's up to the commission, it's a policy decision.
And for the record, everyone loves our tree warden. Awesome. Jeff Minder.
Yeah, he's really great. He's really great.
Awesome. Yeah.
And the other item was the ethics, I'm reading from a news I had sent back on this. It said Ethics Commission appointments would now take place in April instead of July to accommodate for the RTM summer recess in July.
Sure. We did discuss that. We did not decide to move forward with the change.
Oh, okay.
There was a mix of opinions within the group, but as an overall, though, we did not decide to change that start date of the commission. Once again, happy to take that up again if that's the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
Well, I think I remember there was issues when I was there because the RTM sometimes takes that month off. They take July off. It's like a break, summer break. So then that could interfere with appointments. I think that's why it was recommended. I don't know who recommended it, but somebody did.
Judy Ewing,
Something from the discussion, because I'm in favor of changing it to July, but then they said there was no transition language at one of the meetings I went to, because there was no transition language, they didn't want to change it right now, but if somebody could come up with some transition language.
Well, it's in July now, right? But I guess they can't vote on these people because they take that month off.
Yeah.
Just
Someone-
because,
Some people have terms that would end
Was to change it to April.
off times if we change the term, but that's easy to fix. We can just write, you know.
And Ms. Ewing's exactly right, that was part of the discussion. Also part of the discussion was that we feel that it is also the responsibility of the appointing authority. Currently, there would be the Board of Selectmen as it relates to the Ethics Commission to plan ahead. And there's nothing to preclude the Board of Selectmen and the RTM approving the new Ethics Commissioners with a term date that would take effective when the person they're replacing, that term expires. So they can be approved in April for a term starting in July. But once again, we're happy to revisit the change in the start date if that's the recommendation of the board here.
Did a great job.
Very good.
You did.
you did.
Excellent job.
Yeah.
That's it for tonight, right?
Yes.
He did do a good job.
So can I just
Very
say,
calm, cool,
We couldn't have done it
collected,
without him.
and
So-
friendly.
Yeah.
this commission is one of the greatest commissions I've ever seen in action. I can't say you're the A-team because someone complained. Someone sent me an email.
I was George Papard, man.
I said this was the A-team, and I got an email from someone who said the A-team, it was a terrible show and they blew things up, and I like that comparison. But so I won't say you're the A-team, but you are the A-team. I mean, this was a
Back on
really,
the
really
Ground Seal.
Yeah, and you guys did so much work. I think just the way you collaborated and with each other was really amazing, and the way you all held you were patient and willing to learn and willing to talk to people and take feedback. I thought it was wonderful, and thank you. Town owes you a debt of gratitude, but now you're all experts, and this won't be the last thing that we ask you to do, because now that you're all experts, we have to make sure that we continue. Yeah.
Well, this process isn't done either.
This process isn't done.
Right.
But, and Eric, thanks for your summary. This was a really good meeting as well. Really, really well done. And we had Brian McCann, who does this for a living, which is pretty amazing. He had a municipal attorney, and hopefully you all enjoyed it. I know it was long hours, though.
We have to recognize Eric, though. I mean, he was just absolutely phenomenal in this process, keeping us organized, on task. As you saw tonight, I mean, the consummate professional, and so we owe him a debt of gratitude. And thank you to the administration, too. Thank you for all your help and support.
Leadership too, that was.
Yeah, Chris
Chris's leadership.
couldn't make it tonight, but
But
yeah, thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry. George, Jerry.
Face.
Forget, Eric was
told my
Murdoch,
wife.
right?
I liked it.
No, I can't do that. I'm going to get angry email. Thank you again, and looking forward to the next meeting and seeing what the public has to say. And Judy, for showing up at every meeting, doing your homework. Thank you.
As I could.
Ex
Watch the
officio.
Looks
videos.
like,
Oh, Christine,
Well, I want to thank you all, but also, there is public comment just on the agenda. Just want to make sure you realize that, Mr. Gerber, before.
good point.
is anyone, well, Prue's on. Is there any public here other than, so we're going to take public comment, but Judy, every time you raise your hand, we called on you. So do you have any comment that you would like to make?
No, I'd like to thank them. I enjoyed the meetings very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Prue, do you want to make public comment? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion? Any other comments from the board?
No, just thank you all. Sorry, couldn't be there in person this week. But thank you for all your work, and it's not goodbye. We have so much more. So many more meetings. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other in the next couple of weeks. So enjoy your evening, and thank you for everything. And motion to adjourn.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Bye.
We're adjourned.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night, everybody.
Have a great night.